Hello, my name's Adam Smith, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this digital dialogue, which is a collaboration between Nobel Prize Outreach and the Brazilian Academy of Sciences. And we are going to be discussing the value of science. Over the next 3.5 hours, we have what I hope will be a really fascinating program for you, and I'll go through some of the details of that in a couple of minutes. But first, I'm delighted to welcome two people to give opening remarks. First, let me hand over to Lara Spreckmann, CEO of Nobel Prize Outreach.
On behalf of Nobel Prize Outreach, I'm pleased to welcome you to this event that is preceding Nobel Prize Dialogue Brazil, taking place next year. Humanity is facing serious challenges. The situation we're living right now has once more shown how important science, research, and collaboration are in our lives. Today, we will speak about how science can contribute to society, and in turn, how society can contribute to science. Who more inspiring and credible to talk about these topics than Nobel laureates? It's a great honor for me to introduce medicine laureate May-Britt Moser and physics laureate Serge Haroche. I hope you enjoy the session. I would like to thank the Brazilian Academy of Sciences for this beautiful collaboration and our Nobel International partners for supporting us. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Lara. And next, to give opening remarks from the Brazilian side, it's my pleasure to introduce Hugo Aguilanillo, who is the Executive Director from the Instituto Serra.
Dear participants, my name is Hugo Aguilanillo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Instituto Serra, the first private institution to support science and science outreach in Brazil. It is a great honor to be part of the Nobel Prize Dialogue in Brazil with the participation of the Brazilian Academy of Science, especially under a theme that reflects so deeply the essence of Serra, the value of science. At Serra, we support basic science because we believe that fundamental knowledge has the power to transform the world, and the Nobel Prize recognizes every year astonishing scientific advances that have led to tremendous transformations. This year, science has allowed extremely rapid development of vaccines against COVID-19 because of decades of fundamental research conducted by scientists who are passionate about what they do. There is only one possible solution to the health crisis we've been experiencing for just over a year, and that solution is science. In Brazil, our scientists are also passionate about what they do, and they do it under adverse circumstances, from successive budget cuts to waves of misinformation and denialism. This is why this event, at this moment, in this country, is highly symbolic. It shows that one key value of science is unity to defend and to promote rational thinking. Today, two Nobel Prize winners, Serge Haroche and May-Britt Moser, will spend some time discussing science with students from all over Brazil. And Serra is very proud to be part of this. I wish you all a great event.
Thank you very much indeed, Hugo. So, as Hugo says, this is an extraordinarily challenging time for all Brazilians, and I'd like to thank you all for making the time to be here with us now. So, over the next 3.5 hours, the program is broadly divided into 3 pieces. For the first hour, we're going to have a discussion about the value of science, first featuring, as you've heard, Serge Haroche and May-Britt Moser, and then they will be joined by 2 Brazilian participants, Luiz Davidovich and Helena Nader. Then there'll be a short break during which we'll show a video of the Nobel laureate David Gross giving a lecture on scientific truth. And we'll move into a panel discussion between May-Britt Moser and 20 selected students representing many regions of Brazil. They'll have the chance to ask her questions, anything they like, and you'll have the chance to watch. Then there'll be another short break when we'll be showing a panel discussion on scientific truth from a previous dialogue, and then we'll move into a second discussion between students and laureate, this time with Serge Haroche, and again another 20 students selected from different regions in Brazil will be in conversation with him. So that's our program for today, and now let's get started with part one. And I'm delighted to welcome on screen Serge Haroche and May-Britt Moser. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So, you both have an association with South America. In particular, Serge, you have a very long-standing association with Brazil, don't you? You're on mute, I'm afraid. Serge, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Yes, excuse me. Yes, it started about 40 years ago. The first time I came to Brazil was in 1983. It was a joint meeting of the French and Brazilian physicists in atomic physics, in quantum optics. And at that time it's the first time I met Luiz Davidovich and another colleague, Nissim Zaguri, and we started working together. They were at that time theorists, and in Paris I was an experimentalist, and so we started collaborating with each other. It was very fruitful, very interesting. And in the following years, Brazil, Luiz Davidovich and Nissim Zaguri at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro have started, although they are theorists, they have started an experimental group working in this field. This was a time when the funding in Brazil was much better than it is now, and I think we might talk about that, and it has been alluded to already in the introduction of this meeting. I just want to say that this collaboration has been very fruitful. It was in basic science. We learned a lot about the behavior of atoms and photons. This is fundamental science, but it may have applications in quantum information. And this collaboration over the years has shown us the direction into which we must go if we want to develop this into applications. And I hope this will continue with not only between us, Luis and myself, but between the researchers who have taken over this research now, younger researchers, and I hope that they will soon be able to travel again and to meet again in meetings. And I hope that, for instance, that we will be able to come to Brazil next year when this meeting will be in person and not as we have to do it now through the internet.
Thank you very much indeed, Serge. And you already raised several important points that I think we're going to be talking about in the next hour. And May-Britt, not so much Brazil, but you're a specialist, or not a specialist, you're a lover of South America.
Yeah, I've been a lover of South America, but then unfortunately as a tourist. But I've been traveling in Peru, in Ecuador, been twice to Galapagos, and the people that I have met when I traveled were just so friendly. So I remember when I came back to Europe, I was thinking, do I really want to go back to Europe? Because the cultural difference was so harsh, and so it was very different. But also the nature and the resources that we see in South America, and the brilliant people. So I would really like to learn more about also Brazil. And as I said, I haven't been there, but I know people have been there, and they love Brazil. And I've spoken to many people from Brazil, and of course, they love their home country.
May I add something about that? I just want to add something. In fact, before coming to Brazil, it was the first time I went to South America was in Brazil at that time. And before that, I had been, of course, many times in the United States, as all the young scientists and postdocs have to do. And I remember the first time we came to Brazil, and my wife was joining me with our children. And one day she asked me the question, but why have we been so much in the US, and why is it the first time we come to South America and to Brazil? And I agree with what May-Britt said about the completely different atmosphere, not only in Brazil. I have traveled a lot in Argentina, in Ecuador, in Colombia, and everywhere I have found is really a will for knowledge and for acquiring knowledge and for culture. And this is, of course, very difficult because the financial conditions, the economic conditions are very harsh, and the education in these countries suffers from many shortcomings. And I think this is one of the very important issues that these countries have to face, to have a better elementary, middle school and high school education, even before we talk about science.
I missed that.
Thank you. Yes, well, that's definitely a topic we're going to be talking about. And I was just going to say that, May-Britt, a lovely introduction to Brazil will be this hour-long session with students from all over Brazil that's coming up, which should make you feel as if you're there at least. So, in the face of the pandemic, in the face of the crisis, it's obvious that science has a value, and we all recognize that. So let me start by asking, why do you think it's necessary for us to be gathering together now to talk about the value of science? Serge, please.
Of course, I think we are living very challenging times because of the pandemic, but not only. We have also the issue of climate change, of global warming, of the necessity to feed an ever-increasing population, all kinds of health and environmental issues. And the solution to all these problems can come only from science. We need, for instance, if you want to mitigate the effect of global warming, we have to develop new ways to produce energy in a clean way, that is renewable energies, solar energy, wind energy, but these energies are intermittent, so we need to be able to store energy also during the time it is not produced. We need also to think about nuclear energy, because nuclear energy is a clean form of energy. It's an energy which does not rely on fossil fuels, and at least for the next 20 or 30 years, it will be impossible to produce all the clean energy we need if we don't rely on some kind of nuclear energy. And France is a country which is very active in this sense. So we need science, and we also need science to recognize what are the problems. I think one of the big issues today is that there are a lot of people who are deniers, who don't accept, don't recognize reality, and are not able to analyze the situation in a rational way. And so we need science just to remind ourselves that it's impossible to react in front of all these problems if we are not rational. So this is the utilitarian aspect of science. But there is also another aspect, which is the cultural and civilization aspect. And I guess we will talk about that too. But in a time of pandemic, I think, and in a time of urgency, I think it's important to recall that we need to have governments who understand the value of science, because without science, we are unable to solve the problems and to meet the challenges that we are facing.
Thank you. May-Britt, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, what I would like to say was something that I forgot to say when you asked me the first question. So if I'm allowed to just wind back to that, and then you can ask me.
Absolutely, it's your session.
Yeah, no, so what? Because I was thinking about this fantastic time we spent in South America. But it's also important for me to say that even though Brazil and Argentina, they are different countries, still South America, and we have the best students from Argentina. So we have now a girl here, Soledad, trained from physics, and Emilio Kropf. He was trained in physics from Argentina. He stayed here, and as trained in physics, and then we could ask Serge, could you imagine how you could work in our lab, doing our experiments, doing our surgeries? He did that. He translated himself, and he did so well and we are still collaborating with him, published now a paper this year with him that we are really proud of. So he is the one who found the speed cells in the entorhinal cortex, and also Soledad working with us that we really hope we can keep, and her husband Ivan. So this to collaborate with these brilliant minds in South America, I'm so proud of doing that. So I'm sorry I forgot to mention that.
Well, but thank you for raising it, because what you've both pointed to is the importance of exchange, cultural exchange, diversity. Let's talk about that. It's peripheral but important. Why is it so important that there should be diversity in science?
I could start. Is that okay, Serge? Because so you know also my close colleague and the co-director here with me, May-Britt Moser, and we started our lab in 1996. And the moment we started our lab, we decided that diversity is one of the most important part of our work, not only when it comes to diversity in our field, because neuroscience is a broad field where you need to know physics, mathematics, biology, medicine, and all these things, but also diversity when it comes to cultures and all other things, because the ghost that we had in front of our eyes, that was that we should clone ourselves. We didn't want inbreeding. So we worked so hard to get people to work with us that would have really different ideas about what we were doing, because that is how you put fuel and gasoline on creativity, that you get input from all kinds of different minds, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's very important, and it started long ago. In fact, as soon as science has developed, rational thinking and the methods of modern science have started in the 17th century. First, it was in Europe, but again, already at that time, the collaboration between scientists and the interactions and cross-fertilization coming from different parts of Europe was obviously essential, and it's still the case today. And in my research group, I have had the luck to welcome students and postdocs and visitors from 20 or 25 different countries. And this is very, very enriching, because people, what is wonderful about science is that it's universal. It has no boundaries, but you get, you do it more efficiently if you can share the experiences and if you can share the world viewpoints of people coming from different backgrounds. And this is what I got with my Brazilian friends. In fact, we immediately were on the same wavelengths to understand what was going on, although we had different backgrounds, different cultural heritage. I think it's very important, and the collaboration should continue. And even with governments which are very different, for instance, now one country which is developing very fast in science is China. It has become one of the center of science in the Far East. China has a government and politics which is quite different from what we have in Europe. But as scientists, I think we have to find the ways to collaborate with people in China, because we share the same values as long as research is being concerned, as long as science is being concerned. So I think it's very important.
Oh, that is such an important. Now I'm on echo. So I think that is so important that we scientists, we allow ourselves to ignore politics somehow, because we think alike. Our star, our vision, that is to understand, to have questions that we want to have answers to. And that is not politics. That is something much deeper. And it's like what I also say in sports. Sports is also independent on politics. And if we can rather support people with, yes, we find it interesting the way you are thinking, even though politics is difficult. I think that that support among scientists. So I think we feel like a big family that are spread around the globe. Isn't that true?
Yes, and
We have so much in common. We have the curiosity. We go for the big questions. We go for the answers. And then the way we address our questions, and the questions, of course, are different, but still the passion and the enthusiasm and almost the personalities going for this has so much in common.
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond the fields. I think it's the same in different fields in science, in physics, in biology, and for some issues, some questions, the fields are working together. I remember I visited your lab in Norway about 5 or 6 years ago. You are doing something very different from what I am doing, but I was fascinated when I saw your labyrinths with rats and what you were able to do. And in fact, the questions you were addressing were questions very close to what we do in physics. You had a kind of GPS in the brain, and with atomic clocks, we're interested in the GPS that we are using every day. And so the issues are somewhat similar. I can give another example, but the research which is now being carried out to find exoplanets and to try to find if there is life in other planets is something which brings together biologists and physicists. And this is, and I think what is interesting in this is that it's useless. It's quite clear that we will never be able to interact directly with some kind of faraway civilization, because the laws of physics tell us that's impossible. But nevertheless, we want to know. And if we can know, and if we can find this out, it's invaluable, even if it does not lead to any direct application. And this is also something which brings together all the people on the earth. If you talk to young children, whether they're in Brazil, in Europe, or in China, they are fascinated by these issues. And you bring young people to science when you put in them this kind of dream to understand better the world. And I think that's what we try to do. And this is what makes our work fantastic.
So let me ask you what's gone wrong, because you obviously belong to this this worldwide community of curious people who are all busy searching for the keys to reality, if you like. And you are just like big children in a way, being curious. And so when people are small, they're scientists. When people are scientists, they're scientists. But then again, here we are discussing the value of science. So not everybody thinks like this. So how do people lose the curiosity? Why do they lose the trust in science, the idea that science is truly valuable? Because there is this problem. As you say, there are deniers, and it's a worldwide problem. So what goes wrong? Serge?
Maybe. Okay.
May-Britt? Who's braver?
It's a difficult issue, but it's very paradoxical, because it's quite clear that we live in a time when science has had many triumphs. Science has allowed us to do a lot of things that we could not dream of 1 century ago. And yet it is attacked, and yet you have all these conspiracy theories and all this denial of science. And the reason why it is so, I think, goes beyond, of course, science. You have, I found an explanation, at least an attempt at an explanation which I find interesting. The fact that people are now, a lot of people, due to the globalization of exchanges and the extension of the market, a lot of people feel left on the side of the road. A lot of people feel that they are disfranchised in the system. And when you are disfranchised, what you try to do is to stick to your community, to close yourself, to stick to the people who are around you. And this is amplified by the existence of the internet. And you have these kind of bubbles which are created in the internet, and people share some beliefs which are not scientific at all, which are irrational, but these beliefs hold them together. And science cannot hold together people who belong to a community, because by definition, science is universal. So the truth of science, the values of science are not a glue which will give you some kind of protection inside your community. So then you decide that everything has a value, that an opinion is as valid as a theory, and then you are lost for science, because by definition, science has to try to justify models and theories from observation. And you have to start by a objective information about the world around you. And in this community, in this way of thinking, people don't believe anymore in facts. It's not a surprise that you use this idea of fake news. Fake news is by definition something which does not come from an experiment. And then starting from fake news, you can develop opinions which are not theories. And this can, in some way, comfort yourself in your opinions. And this is the end for science. And what I just want to say to conclude this is that, of course, you need to, science tells you that you have to doubt all the time. You have to ask yourself questions, to doubt about the validity of a model, the validity of a theory. But this is a rational doubt, which is guided by observation. And the doubt of conspiracy theorists is a perverse kind of doubt, a doubt which is not based on observation, a doubt which allows you to say that anything is worth anything else. And I think this is very bad and very a situation that we have to address. And I don't know very well how you can do it, but of course, the general answer is education. You have to start with young children to explain them what rational thinking is about, maybe to give them an idea of what's going on by having lectures about the history of science, tell them how science has built up its own values, and develop education. And I think this is a starting point for everything.
Can I?
Yes.
Yeah. No. So. I agree, of course, completely with Serge. But since I'm a psychologist too, I would like to put some emotional words on it. And if there are a lot of negative emotions around, like people are afraid, they, as Serge say, if they feel sad or something, they need to feel that they belong. As you said, and in psychology, we know that the best way to belong to a group is to have enemies. And then if you have all these conspiracy theories, and if you have these facts that only you believe in, then you come closer, and then the others who are not believers, they are enemies. And then, so I think what we should do is to find this glue that you talk about, Serge. And I think the glue is there. It's to change it to the positive emotions and not the negative emotions. And I'm just thinking about my childhood. The time I was the most happy was when my teacher brought me out to the beach and told me about all the things that we saw on the beach, and being so enthusiastic. And we could ask all the detailed questions about the families of plants and all the creatures that we saw, where would they come from? And if you could then think of these layers of information, you're first curious about what is around you, and then you get more and more information that are the data that we need in science. So what I think is that all children are born with curiosity. And you've seen the light in the eyes of children. They just tell me more. I need to know. I need to understand. And maybe that is what is driving science. Maybe that is what is driving the superiority of humans when we compare us to other species, when it comes to what we can develop. And now I'm not just thinking about the atom bomb and all these terrible things, but science has brought so much good to humanity. And this hasn't happened in our close species. So why didn't that happen? Because they couldn't follow their curiosity the way we have allowed ourselves. So I think even we know that with even animals, that they're so curious, they explore, they want to know more and more. But the moment we or animals are afraid, they stop. So we have to secure children and people around us and say it's okay, and even to as I say to not have all the facts. Still, we know so much already that it's okay not to know everything, where we are coming from, the end of the universe, but we can find out. We are allowed to ask. And I think when now, hopefully, the COVID situation is over and we will not get a new pandemic, so that museums can open again, so that we can meet children, so that we can meet people, and then be there to address questions and also ask questions ourselves. I think that is what we need, and as we heard from Serge, this fake news, we need to be trained to find out what is fake and not is fake. And I think people are eager to try to understand how to do that, but somehow they have been too afraid. Some people. I think.
Your faith and your belief in people is very encouraging to hear, May-Britt. It's a very hopeful message. Serge, you wanted to come in, please.
Yes, I think you said something very important when you alluded to your own experience about learning on the beach or what was going on. And I think for that, you need a good teacher. You need a teacher who is able
Exactly.
to instill this enthusiasm, these dreams, these ideas into children. And this brings me back to what I said. We need a good education starting from elementary school. And to have a good education, you need good teachers. And to have good teachers, you need to have a society which recognize the value of teachers, the fact that the teachers are the most important people in society. And I think this is true in Europe, but this is even more true in South America, where I know that a lot of schools are poor because the teachers are not paid, are not recognized as they should be. And if you don't have teachers who are motivated, who can really do their job without having material problems, then it's very difficult to get this across.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, frankly, bringing children up to learn to have the freedom to doubt as adults is a kind of luxury when you've got educational systems that are collapsing under the strain of just getting people to pass their exam or whatever. So it's,
yeah.
Right. This is a wonderful conversation, and I'm delighted now to bring two more people to join it. So may I have Luiz Davidovich and Helena Nader on screen, please, as well. Hello, both of you. Luiz, you're, of course, president of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences. Nice to have you with us. And Helena, you're co-chair of the InterAmerican network of Academies of Sciences. Welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And we have two biomedical scientists on screen and two physicists. So the situation in Brazil has already been talked about, of course, a little bit, but Luiz and Helena, would you like to just explain to us exactly what's happening right now in Brazil?
Well, if I may start, well, first of all, hi, May-Britt, hi, Serge, hi, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Here, I mean the cloud. We cannot even say that in Brazil or Europe, we are all in the cloud. So, but it's a pleasure to be with you. And I should also say, just to start, that, of course, we acknowledge the contribution of Serra Pileira. Hugo was speaking in the beginning. which was very important for us. And also the Minister of Education helped us with the contact with universities. And you are going to see the result in a while. Very bright students were selected to participate in this session. Now, when I look at the situation in Brazil, which is a terrible situation, these are the days in which we had more than 1,000 deaths in 24 hours. So it reminds me of a book of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, The Chronicle of a Death Foretold. And this was foretold 1 year ago. Many people were pointing out that this would be a terrible disease, that was not just a kind of flu, it was much worse, and that we should make efforts to get vaccines against this, and to try not to waste energy with false drugs, marketing drugs that are inefficient, and things like that. So it was foretold, and that actually shows this dramatic side to this pandemic in Brazil. I think that we lacked coordination, central coordination. And also we learned that denialism, which was mentioned by Hugo right in the beginning, by Serge also, denialism kills. That's the lesson we are learning from this pandemic. Denialism kills. And denialism, which was explored by Serge and May-Britt before, is not just about the shape of the earth. We could call it, in a general way, the flat earth kit, not the drug kit, which was distributed in Brazil sometimes, but earth, which comprises several things. These inefficient drugs, the denial of human action on climate and global warming, and many other things. So I think the reason for that has already been explored by Serge and May-Britt in a brilliant way. And of course, education is a very important part of it. Education of children and showing them what science is. And I think that people know about that science is very different from dogma. Science is something that is alive and that changes with time with new knowledge. And scientists are eager to actually change their ideas about the universe with new ideas that could actually, some of them, change our daily life, as it has been shown in the past. So, it's a tragic situation. People, it has got to the point where everybody has someone, that was dead because of COVID-19. And of course, as Brazilian Academy of Sciences, we are putting pressure on the government so as to have more control on the situation. All branches of government, Congress, even justice and executive branch, and to try to meet this question. But it was a chronicle of a death foretold, and that's very sad.
Thank you very much indeed, Luis. Luis has expressed it very nicely. Helena, but do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would like to thank Serge and May-Britt, and also you, Adam, that worked really hard to put this session together. And what we are having in Brazil is a country that I don't know anymore. It's curious. Behavior that doesn't fit with the country that I used to know. And people are silent. And this is it's becoming very powerful. I don't know if people are not complaining too much because everybody's afraid of COVID-19. So we're not going to the streets because we are in a kind of a lockdown. But people confused and when we talked about the value of science, it's like faith and science have to be antagonic, and they are not. You can have your faith. And as Luis already said, it's not dogmatic. Faith is a dogma. Science is not. You don't have the final answer. And it's good that we don't have the final answer because we are always searching. And the situation here in Brazil is really, Luisa and I, we have been discussing this every day, several times of a day. There is a statistics, international statistics, saying that by the end of June, we are going to have 500,000 deaths. That's something incredible. We cannot accept this. And the only way to move away from this is through science and through education. So I really thank you both for all the efforts to be here with us. And I hope, and I'm going to finish, through the young minds that are going to participate in the discussion with both of you, May-Britt and Serge, you're going to see the Brazil that we believe. We are striving, we are fighting for this generation. No one is going to take away from them hope and faith in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Helena. I suppose that we've talked about education already. Everybody on screen believes in the same ideals, and indeed, probably the majority of the audience watching now are already, if you like, not converts, maybe converts is the wrong word, but anyway, they believe in the power of science, they believe in the value of science. So assuming that, a challenge that we all face, audience, you, is how to communicate all of this to people who don't believe or in the value of science, who don't understand the value of science. So alongside education, communication is a very big part. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on what it is that scientists have to do to make it more apparent what the value of science is. Anybody? May-Britt, would you like to jump in?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I just got the message that I was muted. I think, like Helena said, and Luis too, that we are visible. That's the first thing. And now with COVID, it's difficult to be visible. So I'm glad that we can do this. And then, of course, you can't force anybody to be interested in something that they are not interested in. So there must be ways that. But I'm just thinking about it. So we had a Starmus festival here in Trondheim with Garik Israelian, and he is from astronomy. And his idea was to use something that people normally are happy about, music, and combine that with science. And then he got this interest from people who really would love the music, but also was okay with science, and vice versa also. And I think the way he is working is just amazing, and the people that he has been able to attract. So that is the festival type of events, and that is what also Adam has been involved in with these Nobel dialogues, and when we traveled around to give lectures and so on to meet the people. But of course, to meet the people who don't believe or who are not interested in science, I think, as you all have said, we have to start with the children, and have the hope for the children, because they can. So when we see environmental challenges, for example, then tell the children that they shouldn't put plastic out in the nature, and the children will tell their parents, please, I'm ashamed of you, mom, if you throw something into the nature. It doesn't help that the police is coming to the mom and tell the mom, don't do it, because it's but when the child is doing. So I think, and that we've seen also in other more dramatic situations, that the children can be our missionaries, our ambassadors for change and for hope.
Yeah.
Thank you. Luiz. Please, Luiz.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that's an important point, and I think the other important point also is to make people realize what science has already done for the countries, and we are trying to do that in Brazil. The universities in Brazil started much later than the universities in Europe and the United States. The first universities in Brazil were founded in the beginning of the 20th century, and yet it's amazing what the universities, research institutes, and science has done for the country since then. Many people don't realize that the two major institutions that are producing vaccines in Brazil now, Fiocruz and Butantan, they were founded, one in 1900, the other in 1901, more than 100 years ago. And if not for that, we would not have this production of vaccines in Brazil now, you see. Also for agriculture, in the end of the 19th century, there was this school for agriculture founded in São Paulo to solve problems with the coffee in São Paulo. And then other institutions showed up in the beginning of the 20th century. So if not for them, we would not have the food production we have now, which depends heavily on science. Actually, science in the frontier, even genomics is used nowadays in agriculture. So this whole system, which comprises also the CNPq, the Brazilian National Science Foundation, founded in 1951. It was the after Second War effort. So CNPq CAPES, which is the corresponding agency of the Ministry of Education. And then later FINEP, which is an important agency for financing startups and industry. And then the state foundations. All of that was built during decades. And that's what makes Brazilian science strong, actually, that helped to build Brazilian science. So it takes really decades to build this system. And of course, what we are worried about now is that, in order to destroy it, it takes a very short time. So that's why we are fighting so strongly to increase the budget for science and help this system to survive in Brazil.
Could I just comment on some small thing?
I think you first, then Helena, then Serge. Good, go. Yes.
Yeah. No, because I don't want to be as pessimistic. So I would like to thank Luiz for this, because, of course, this small group of non-believers or believers in conspiracy theories and the people who don't care about facts or no facts or the false news, it's not so big community. So I think what you are pointing to, Luiz, is to point to the ignorant people, the people who either don't know because they don't know, nobody have ever told them, or that they haven't put themselves in a situation where they could know. So those would be the targets. And then we could hope for the children of those others in this tiny group that could be a bigger problem. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Helena.
I totally agree. And the other point is those denials, they are too much involved with politics. here in Brazil at least. And it's like you have to be against. You have to be, as you already pointed out, May-Britt, the one that denies and says, I'm against. I have to have an enemy. I like that definition that you gave. It's very important, as Serge already pointed out. We need to have better education. And here in Brazil, we need to play. We can't wait just for the new generation of teachers for middle school, elementary school, kindergarten, and then university. We have to do it all over because there is a huge crisis on education and financing. So we need also to convince, and this is do the good politics, convince our politicians that education and science are investments in the future, and that takes a while to see the result because people want results right away. So it's, but I totally believe that we are going to change the scenario. For instance, for vaccines, Brazil now, the majority of the population wants to have the shot, which means they deny, but not that much.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Serge, please, you wanted to speak.
Yes, I agree, of course, with all what has been said. And I want to come back to what you said, Adam, at the beginning, that in fact, in this kind of meeting, we are, so to speak, preaching believers. It's quite clear that the people who are around this here on the internet and the students that will be listening, which will ask questions to us, believe in science. So the question is how you can go beyond that. And my own experience is that when I have been invited to such an event, they have always been, very often, I had also to interact with school children because I was invited to a high school or to a middle school to give talks. And of course, then it was very useful because, as May-Britt has said, we can really prepare young minds, explain to them the importance of science. But in order to get there, you have to be invited. And to be invited, it means that the teachers or the principal of the school have this mind, have this open mind and want to get this to their children, to their pupils. And so again, we come back to the idea that we need a good education. We need good teachers. We need teachers who understand the value of science, the values of civilization, and who will try to put these ideas forward. Another idea which was very important is the fact that education and science is a long-term project. You don't get results in 6 months or in 1 year. And things can go bad very quickly, but it takes a lot of time for them to improve. I was really moved by what Helena said, that we are expecting 500,000 deaths in Brazil by the end of June. There is no way you will be able to completely change the situation this time in such a short period of time. But we have to keep faith and hope that if the situation evolves in the right direction, the next pandemic or the next crisis will be met with better weapons. And maybe I don't want to enter into politics, but you may take some solace from what happened in the United States. In fact, up to a few months ago, the situation in the United States in terms of denial of the situation, in terms of absurd, advocating absurd drugs and so on, was not so far from what you had in Brazil. And the situation has changed very quickly with the last election. So you may hope that politics can go in the right direction again. And what I want to add to conclude is that what we need and what is really lacking in all countries in the world, most all countries in the world, is the fact that political people don't have a scientific education most of the time. So they don't even when they tell you that they understand. When I talk to a politician and explain the value of science on, he nods, he agrees, or she agrees, but in fact she does not believe in it with his or her guts. He's just playing politics, which means that they want fast results. And of course, if we tell them that good education will give results in 10 years from now, they are not really interested in that. And I think it's also the problem of climate change. Everybody who is intelligent understands that climate change is a bad thing, that we have to do something about it, but the result will be visible in 10, 20, 30 years from now, and this is beyond the horizon of politicians in democracies. And I think this is a challenge that democratic countries have to face, to find the long-term policies. And paradoxically, countries like China are better equipped to face these challenges because they don't have these short-term challenges of new elections every 4 or 5 years. And I think one of the challenge of democracy is to find the ways to have a system which is renewed periodically because it is democracy, but at the same time can keep a long-term goal visible.
Thank you very much indeed. We're running close to the end, I'm afraid. Helena, please come in.
Yeah, what Serge just pointed out is something that we really, Luiz and myself and others, fight a lot here in Brazil, to have a state policy, not a governmental policy. We need that because democracy is really good, but democracy needs to practice state policies and not just governmental, that government specific political view. Thank you, Serge, for pointing out that. It's very, very important.
Could I just comment on that too? Well,
please.
So, because Serge and I have been traveling to China together, and I think we are extremely impressed by the value that the Chinese politicians put into both science and education. And when we meet the people there, they are so well educated that you can just wow. And the whole culture is into, we need education. So it seems to be very different in different places, and that it's possible to get politicians to favor science like they do in China, which is a brilliant place for science.
Yeah, I talked about that with Luiz. We talked a long time ago about that, and Luiz pointed to me the situation of South Korea. 50 years ago, South Korea was a very poor country, was a third world country, and they made a tremendous effort in education. And to do that, they recognized that a teacher, a high school teacher, was as valuable as an engineer. And you had to pay to recognize socially the people to whom you give the education of your children to. And so South Korea, I think, not talking about China, which is not a democratic country, South Korea, which is now a democratic country, was able to get out of poverty because of education.
All good.
Thank you very much indeed. Oh, sorry, we're getting a little interference maybe, but so we have only a couple of minutes left. I mean, one thing that you've all emphasized is in a way that the fact that people belong to communities, everybody belongs to communities, and at the same time, there's this global society of science. And I suppose part of making the value of science apparent is for people to take their understanding of the value of science back to their communities. You on screen are all part of communities, and I'm sure you all know people who are not so convinced by the value of science. So I guess it's beholden on all scientists to remember to talk about what they know with everybody they know. I mean, maybe that's the first thing that people can do to change. And I was wondering if we could just finish with a couple of very brief thoughts on what you recommend that young people watching, waiting for this change that you talk about coming with education, waiting for the better world, what they should do right now. The young scientists watching, what can they do to make things better? Very briefly, 15 seconds. May-Britt.
But in seconds. So they shouldn't be afraid to ask questions, because if they ask questions, they are curious. And if the adults don't address their questions, then they should just still, okay, I have the right to ask questions.
Thank you. Luiz.
Well, I was going in the same direction. I think science, the most important part is to ask the right questions, actually. I mean, the important questions, the fundamental questions. We talk about vaccines today, and we know that the new vaccines are connected to this research on RNA, and this research was motivated by very fundamental questions on the origin of life. So, at the time these questions are formulated, who would know that vaccines would come out of that? And so I would say to the young people, be curious, ask questions, and enjoy science, because I think science is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. There you are. Yes. So that's it. And children ask questions, and somehow after that, school does not motivate them to keep asking questions. So I'll tell them, keep asking questions. That's it.
Be brave.
That really that could be a wonderful place to stop. I want to give the last words to Serge, though.
Oh, I think it was well said. I think young people should know that they cannot know everything. They should not be discouraged by the things they don't know. I want to quote Arthur Shallow, who was my advisor as a postdoc, and he used to say to the young children, and not to the young children, to the young postdocs or students, you don't need to know everything. You just have to find out one thing that other people don't know. And that, I think, is a good definition of research and science. You have to keep your mind open and go in one direction with trust. And you trust in yourself, trust in the values of science, and also some trust in the fact that society will help you. And I think this is the most difficult part, to make sure that you will be sustained and supported by your country, your government. You get money to go into research. But this is not the advice for young people. This is advice for politicians and state people.
Let's hope that politicians and policymakers are watching. And I want to thank you all four of you, for a marvelous discussion. It's been so fascinating to listen to, and it's really important, especially at this time, to have such a discussion. So thank you all. Now we move. Well, thank you.
And stay safe and healthy in Brazil, please.
So now we move to the next part of this program. We're going to take a short break while we assemble the students to meet with May-Britt. And during that time, we're going to show a brief lecture by David Gross, another physics laureate from 2004, on truth and the scientific method. And this was captured at one of our other dialogues that we held in 2017. And it just remains to say that this, of course, it's felt like being in Brazil to me, but it, of course, has been virtual. And we just very much look forward to all being together in person when we visit Brazil for a live Nobel Prize Dialogue in 2022. Anyways, please stay tuned, watch the lecture from David Gross, and you'll see May-Britt on screen again very shortly. Thank you very much indeed.
In preparing this talk, I, too, like the previous speaker, asked the question, what is truth? And looking at the dictionaries, I found, as Simon explained, the correspondence theory of truth. Truth is the quality or state of being true. Or truth is that is true, or in accordance with fact or reality. And what is true? Well, it is agreeing with fact, not false or wrong. So this is a Gordian knot, and we've heard a bit of philosophical discussion about what is truth, and is there such an absolute notion. I'm going to try to, as a theoretical physicist, cut through the Gordian knot and simply define truth as that is revealed by the scientific method. That's a strong statement, and I should say a word about what the scientific method is. I believe it's humankind's greatest invention. It's rather new, only 400 years old. It rests on the assumption, the belief, the tentative hypothesis that the world of observable phenomena is real and intelligible. It can be made sense of in a collective manner, subject to the requirements of logic and consistency, and based on observation and experimentation. And traditionally, we think of the scientific method as consisting of three components: observation, experiment, and theory. Early science is largely observational, and as that improves and we understand what phenomena exist out there in a increasingly precise fashion, we can do quantitative experiments, probing the nature of those phenomena and using theoretical models and mathematical tools. We can try to explain and model those experimental findings, suggest new experiments, make predictions that test our theories and explanations, and then approach the why questions. What, how, and why is a normal progression of science. This scientific method yields explanations and phenomena that can be explained and produces, very importantly, and perhaps that's the driving force behind the evolution of science over the centuries, increases our control and leads to important applications that society appreciates and is willing to sponsor more scientific research. But from the point of view of science, the increasing control and applications of our understanding immediately feed back onto observation and experiment, allowing us to improve our methods of collecting data and exploring the universe. Now, the scientific method produces science, and I'm trying to argue in a way that science is, if you want, the best candidate for what truth is. And if we want to explore what we mean in a precise and powerful way by truth, we could interchange, and I will do so, science and truth at will. Truth, or science, has certain characteristics. As I said before, science, or scientific truth, is based on observation, experimentation, and theoretical constructs. Its findings, facts, and theories are continuously subject to the requirements of logic, consistency, and reproducibility. It is always tentative and must subject its tenets to experimental test. The only judge of the validity of our insights is nature. But as Popper emphasized and Feynman expressed, we are never definitely right. We can only be sure that we are wrong. Nature can disprove our ideas, our predictions, our theories. It can never prove them. It only lets them survive. And from a practical point of view, the working hypothesis of a scientist is that we're on the right track, or our tentative truths are correct, or we have belief in them when it works. The nature of scientific truth is very special and has certain aspects that underlay the Enlightenment and the growth of democracy. Since science and the pursuit of the scientific method require an open, transparent, non-authoritarian society. Science is liberated from its creators. It might be created by a scientist who is then rewarded with prizes and awards, but the created truth belongs to everyone and to no one. Science is universal. It is intended and it applies everywhere and to everyone. It knows no boundaries. Science, scientific truth, lacks all authority save nature. And all are equal in its pursuit. We in science respect the ideas and are willing to subject them to test of anyone. And science, finally, is always bathed in ignorance. It admits to ignorance, to lack of knowledge about the boundaries of our knowledge. Its truth is always tentative and subject to change. The strength of science is clear. It has survived and grown over, and it's survived its many enemies over the last 400 years, partly because truth has the inherent strength of being true. In addition, science has other sources of strength and resiliency. Philip Anderson once remarked that science is a multiply connected web. That is a feature that is a great source of stability. In addition, I would argue that the reductionist nature of fundamental science, which has been expanded and confirmed over the centuries, is also a great source of strengthening this web of truth. Thus, one cannot argue that the CO2 emissions do not cause global warming without contradicting the truth of physical chemistry and thus the truth of quantum theory of atoms and the whole web of fundamental physics. Truth is not always convenient. Science does have limitations. We should recognize those. There are questions that currently, at least, cannot be addressed by observation, by experiment, or by theory, by the scientific method. These include questions like, why is there something rather than nothing? Or, what is the meaning of life? But other questions that were once thought to be outside the domain of science, such as what is life and what is the history of the universe, are now part of science and addressable by the scientific method. Physical cosmology today seeks to address a question, how did the universe begin, previously left to religion and philosophy. Now, the challenge for science, especially in today's world, is great. The search for truth can be full of pitfalls. Scientists are fallible human beings, people who are susceptible to bias, conscious and unconscious. And indeed, the scientific method requires policing to make cheating difficult and to protect one from unconscious bias. We are continually trying to perfect these methods, perfect our instruments and our observations, and improve statistical tools. But therefore, scientists correctly admit to uncertainty and are generally very careful and cautious in their conclusions and predictions. And this can produce confusion outside of science, where such restraint is uncommon, even as the basis for pronouncements is less reliable. How are we to convey to innumerate society that many facts, theories, and predictions, having passed through the strong filter of the scientific method, are highly reliable, while at the same time retaining uncertainty and tentativeness? To put it more bluntly, how are we to compete with liars? It's an unfair fight. We come to this fight with rules of behavior that the other side often does not accept. And this is a question to the rest of the day. I would love to hear the answer to this. How can scientific truth compete with liars who don't accept the rules of the game? I am an optimist, and I truly believe that scientific truth will prevail. Science has survived Pope Urban VIII's attack on Galileo and his Copernican ideas. Science survived Stalin's attack on Darwinism. Science survived Hitler's attack on Jewish science and Einstein. And science will survive Donald J. Trump and his ilk. Truth will triumph. Thank you.
2, 1.
Hello, welcome back to this session, which is a lovely discussion between May-Britt Moser and our selected students from all over Brazil. And if you're looking at the same gallery view of all these faces that I am, it is just such a pleasure to see the diversity, the wonderful diversity of Brazil represented on screen in this way. Now, you've all been carefully selected by a rigorous process, so our congratulations for being here. And this is absolutely your session, your chance to ask May-Britt whatever you like. My job is really just to get you to ask questions. And I must ask the audience also to forgive my poor pronunciations of the names, but off we go. Now, if we can start, please, with Luisa. Do you want to ask a question?
At Federal University of Espírito Santo, and I'm delighted to be here talking to you guys. Mai, you know that we women carry this burden like an obligation to want to be a mom, to look after the house chores, and we are like to believe that we can't be mothers and scientists at the same time, or women and scientists, or women and nothing else. Do you, as a woman, mother, and a scientist, felt this burden over you? How did you split your time between work and children? And what would you like to encourage us young women to pursue our way in science?
Thank you for that question. So, of course, I have been very fortunate to have a career in science, to follow my curiosity, and still having two wonderful children and a very supportive husband. So I think that I've been extremely lucky, but I was also very naive because I thought it was a human right to get a family. And I didn't think of the problems, and I didn't want to see the problems. And somehow we got it to work we even asked our histology technician, who had never been babysitting before, to babysit our children, and even brought him with us to conferences so that because I didn't want to leave my children. So of course, I don't have a general answer, but I think it's a human right to have children. And I think that our children, even though they have lived a different life, being traveling with us and also being in the lab, they have a much bigger family than normal children, because they have uncles and aunts and cousins around in the whole world. And now I can't, if it wouldn't have been for the COVID situation, I couldn't have stopped them from traveling, because they think that the whole world is their family. So, but to find out how to do this, it's very difficult. And we families, we had some ideas that could we go together to look after our children? So one day for one family, and then the next day for another family, and such things. So there are things that is possible to do if you organize yourself. But of course, I feel ashamed, as I said, because Norway is a country where it's okay to have the children in the nurse and in the kindergarten, and it's a country where we also are allowed to take maternity and paternity leave, so that you can stay with your baby when you are breastfeeding. So all these things, I know that this is different in different countries, but I believe in you, and you have the right to have a family. And I know that you are so smart that there are solutions that we don't see now that you can find that could also help other families in the future.
Thank you very much indeed, May-Britt. Yes, please, Bruna.
At the graduate program in health science at Federal University of Uberlândia, located in the state of Minas Gerais. Considering the position that women currently occupy in science, in your opinion, what kind of public policies are necessary to improve women's belonging to science? Thanks very much.
I think the first thing to do is that we females don't feel that we are female scientists, but we are scientists. Because if we believe in ourselves, then other people also believe in ourselves. If we always excuse ourselves, or we try to hide or do something like that because we are females, then we are working against ourselves. And I'm sure that most men don't think about female scientists as females, but as scientists. So we should go around the panel here and ask, because it's what you do, the questions you have, the way you address the questions, that is what is matter. It doesn't matter if you are a female or a male. It's the quality, and that you believe in your work, and that you work hard on things that you believe, and that you are honest with your data and with your questions. So then be proud of the scientist you are, whatever is your background or whatever. You just have to believe in yourself, and then other people will believe in you.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for the two wonderful questions so far. I'd just like to point out that, of course, you're asking these questions on behalf of also all the audience who are not able to ask questions. So it's really lovely that you formulate such beautiful questions. Thank you. Angelica, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Angelica Martins. I'm studying civil engineering at the Federal University of Rondônia, located in the capital, Porto Velho. I'm part of the undergraduate research program, and I'd like to ask the following question. The city I live in has its cultural background influenced by immigrants from different regions of the country. Comparing with the academic field, how do you see the importance of cultural diversity in the development of science?
Oh, thank you for that wonderful question. So, as we already have discussed in this other panel, when Edward Moser, my close colleague, and I started our lab, only two of us, in 1996, it was extremely important for us with diversity. Not because it was fashion or that it was good politics or anything like that, but because we think that for being creative, to get the best questions, you need input from people that are different from yourself, that have a different background, both when it comes to what field people have been trained in, and also the cultural background and all this, because if you get all this diversity, then you can start to ask the really good questions in a good way. If you just clone yourself, you're finished with science. Just forget about it. Science is like art. It's creativity, and you need inputs.
May-Britt, can I just quickly ask, do you think that people from different places think about science differently? Are they different sorts of scientists, or is there just one sort of scientist?
So at least, of course, we are all very different, but what I think is so interesting is when we start to talk, how similar we are. And especially scientists. I think scientists are a kind of a strange family, all of us, that we belong to this same family because we are curious, we want to ask questions, and we want to get the answer. And we have also experienced this blessing of when you get an answer to your question, then it's, wow, I understand something that I didn't understand yesterday. what a feeling. And I think all of you have experienced this, even if you just sat there and tried to solve a mathematical puzzle. And when you got the answer after working on this puzzle a whole day, then, wow, it feels so good. And this is a secret that we shouldn't tell people who are not scientists, how fantastic it is to be a scientist, because then the whole world are going to end up as scientists.
Okay. Erili, if I've pronounced that right, I'm sorry.
Hello there, my name is Erili Hikarte. I'm a journalism student at the Federal University of Pernambuco. I'm so pleased to be talking to you. Well, my question is linked to both journalism and science areas, because for many years these fields were influenced by philosophical positivism theories that say science should be neutral and objective. Here in Brazil, for example, this mindset continues to exist, and many scientific data or news are rejected whenever they can be applied to shed light on social inequalities, for example. So in your opinion, Dr. May, is science really unbiased and aloof to political issues? That is, can science and politics be dissociated from one another? Thank you.
I think I would have to give this question back to you, because I feel that I'm not qualified for addressing your question. But I like your idea about qualitative and quantitative science, because when I was young, then I started first with mathematics and physics, and then, oh, qualitative, what is this? But of course, in order to start a science project, you have to do the qualitative work both first and during the project. And that is also why we have pilot experiments and so on, that we test some qualitative ideas. But when it comes to politics and science, then we could also go to fake news that probably you are touching. And I think we just have to believe that since we believe so much in science ourselves, then people has to believe because they see we believe so much. And we believe in data, we believe in questions. And then if it's possible for you, when you become a journalist, to show what science is doing for humanity. Of course, there are also bad things following science, but there's so much good that follows science. And even if science invented plastic, we can still find ways to get rid of the plastic with science. So you need science in order to get a better life.
Thank you, May-Britt. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And Ana Paula, please.
Hello, Mai. It's a wonderful pleasure to meet you. I'm Ana Paula from the Federal University of Pará. You mentioned mathematics and physics a lot. So, and to me, a big part of being creative in science is this transdisciplinarity, this interdisciplinarity. So I was wondering, what was the role that transdisciplinarity played in your scientific achievements? And how do we find time to explore other areas while also focusing on our own work?
That's also a brilliant question. So thank you all for having so brilliant minds that you ask me all these fantastic questions. No, so since I'm in neuroscience, that is interdisciplinary by itself. And especially nowadays, in our field, and I work with spatial navigation and memory and big cell ensembles, now we have got techniques so that we can see thousands of cells being active in the brain of a moving animal. And of course, when you start to get so massive data, because one cell has then so many spikes during just a few minutes, that it's too complex if you don't understand mathematics and physics. But of course, not all of us, I'm a psychologist. So I even though I started out with physics and mathematics, I can't do all these modeling and calculations and all these things. I have to collaborate with fantastic South American people, for example, Soledad Gonzalez, who is sitting in the next office of mine, coming from Argentina. And she is trained in physics, and she can make these models and she can do this analysis together with us. But what is important for us is that we can talk. Communication is extremely important. So if I don't understand what she's saying because she's speaking physics, and if she wouldn't then have understood what I said because I'm speaking neuroscience language, then it would be hope without hope. So, but we manage, and that is again, we talked about diversity, and that is so interesting. So we in our lab we have people from physics, from mathematics, from biology, from medicine, from psychology, from all kinds of topics, and all this. It's like it's going into a melting pot, and out comes the most wonderful ideas and data that you can think of, because we allow ourselves to talk with people who know so much more than we do, for example, in mathematics.
Thank you. Gabrielle, please.
Hi, May. I'm Gabriel Coimbra, and I'm studying medicine at the Vale do Rio Doce University. It's located in the state of Minas Gerais in the southeast region. So we know that making mistakes is important and is part of anyone's learning process, but the fear of feeling and being ridiculed on social media and public, etc., has never been greater, at least in Brazil. So what we can do so that the fear of making mistakes doesn't prevent young people from pursuing their dreams?
So this is so important, Gabrielle, because I think I said to you that we scientists, we are like artists, and we need creativity, and we need to believe in ourselves. And then these negative emotions, like being afraid, being angry, or all these other emotions, they will just block our creativity. So we have to work on our anxiety, and as you say, science is about high risk and high gain. But sometimes we need to also do something that is safer, so that we can point to, we don't only fail, we do something that is good. And I think if we have good supervisors, they are able to say, okay, now we have worked on this question for so and so long time, and this didn't give us, we don't understand the result. Then can we turn this to something different and something positive, and addressing it with maybe different methods or doing something different? Then science is not about being afraid to fail, but it's to find a new way to address the question. So I think if we, so it's also about, so people ask me, oh, how is it to get the Nobel Prize, and how hard did you work to get the Nobel Prize? And I said, I never worked hard to get the Nobel Prize. I worked hard because I was driven crazy by the questions that I wanted to have the answer to. So if you're driven crazy to get the answers to questions, then you sort of forget about all the failures, I think, hopefully, and then think, okay, this is difficult, maybe it's possible to look at this in a different way. And then the road is blocked just now, but maybe we can do it in a different way.
Miguel, you wanted to follow up on this?
Yes. Hello, Dr. Moser. So my name is Miguel Quintela. I'm an MD, PhD student at Federal University of São Paulo. So my question is about translational research. So translational research has gained a lot of focus in the past decades. Many scientists, however, believe that always trying to have an immediate impact with their research narrows creative discoveries. So how free should science, basic science, be?
So that's a very difficult question, but I understand what you say, and I think what we see now with the vaccine, which is so important for us, with the mRNA vaccine, people started to study yeast. And you, as a medical doctor, you think, not you, but if you should think about, you should rescue patients, not think about yeast. But if you had worked with yeast and you had discovered how the DNA, RNA, mRNA work, and you could then, from this work, show that it's possible to develop the mRNA vaccine from the knowledge from yeast, then after 20 years, you would have been a fantastic doctor, if you see what I mean. So it's the problem we have with basic science is that it's so slow. And we don't know, we can't say it's important to study yeast. But we know it's important because we need to understand the nature around us. And sometimes the answers we get from our questions will rescue humanity. And sometimes it will enrich us so that we understand more, so that we can see photos of the black hole. We don't need it, but it's good for us to understand the world. That is what is driving humanity forward.
Thank you. What beautiful concepts we're dealing with here. Agatha, please.
Hi. Hello, good morning, Dr. Moser. Such an honor to be here with you. My name is Agatha. I study medicine in University of Brasilia. I'd like to begin a discussion about the life of scientists. It is not always full of rewardings and excitement. Sometimes it can be very lonely and it can be frustrating sometimes. I imagine you faced many of these difficulties during your career, and here, especially for us in Brazil, that we don't have many government support or private resources coming to this area, especially now that science is being so questioned and unbelieved. I'd like you to tell us a little bit of how you faced those difficulties.
As I said, I've always been that kind of person who is too naive to see difficulties, if you see what I mean. I'm from the West Coast in Norway, which has horrible weather, and still I say to people that I have a sun in me, so I don't see the bad weather, and I think that is how science has been for me too. That, so as I said, I worked closely with Edward, and sometimes we have had the responsibility for, and now also we have the responsibility for 130 people. And we don't know if we have a new center of excellence that we're going to apply to get now in 2 years. And if we don't have that, then we don't have a job to all these people. and that's a horrible situation to be in. But we could decide to focus on the horrible part of it, or we could decide to just believe. We think that we find solutions. And somehow, if you believe in solutions, they will appear. I feel like I'm stupid now that I'm sitting here and talking magic. But I think that if we believe in that things will go well, then people around us start to believe too. And if people around us start to believe, then we are a whole crowd of people who believe that this will work. And maybe it doesn't work the way we wanted it to work, but maybe it can work in a different way and we can still do something interesting. But forgive me that I talk like I'm horrible and stupid, because I know how difficult it is to not have funding, and I've been hungry in my in my life, and so I understand that, but I believe that it's possible to find solutions.
Thank you. Katie, you have a follow-up.
Hi, my name is Katie Oliveira, and I am PhD student at Federal University of Roraima. Brazil has the greatest biodiversity of the planet. On the other hand, this biodiversity is poorly represented in scientific production. In our country, science and education generally suffer financial cuts at first sign of crisis. So, how is it possible to overcome inequality in scientific production in countries that don't support science and technology development?
Mm-hmm. So in Brazil, you are so many people. And you are brilliant people. You have brilliant minds around you. If you start to believe that you can do something to change something, you can. And I don't know if you saw this tiny autistic girl from Sweden, Greta Thunberg. She was alone and she was teased because she was having these difficulties. But she believed in what she was doing. And even Trump was afraid of her. And if you saw Malala, she was raised in Pakistan. She was not allowed to go to school, but she had a dad who was a teacher and he supported her. And now she is having this fantastic organization where she is saving females and helping them to get education. And you have so many brilliant people around you. If you hear this word crisis all the day and you believe in crisis, then you get sad, you get tired, you get angry, and you get anxiety. That is what bad leaders need. People who are afraid, people who don't believe, people who think that there is a big crisis that can't be changed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for both question and answer. Renata, please.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, Adam and Professor May-Britt. My name is Renata Noleto. I'm a master's student on biomedical science at Federal University of Delta do Parnaíba, located in the state of Piauí. My question is related to the other we have discussing Now, nowadays, we live under a constant pressure to publish only positive results in a high-impact journal. This causes us a huge stress and makes some of us give up on our careers. In front of this, I would like to ask you for an advice as a scientist and as a psychologist to try to minimize this problem and to help us improve in our mental health. Thank you.
So again, I feel like I should shut up because I don't have any solutions for you. But I believe in you. And I believe that if you have a good question that you address in the best way, if it's not published in Nature or Science or all these journals, you should be proud of the story. And that is what is counting. And the story should be so solid that you are proud. And you know, my supervisor, even in Norway, they are counting papers like crazy. And they say you don't get the position, you don't get a grant if you don't have enough publications, and there should be blah, 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 blah. So my supervisor, and I finished with him in 1995, at that time when everybody should just count and count and count. He said, if you can publish one excellent paper every 5th year, that is showing quality. That is that you, and of course you can't follow that advice because then you don't get your PhD. But you see, to at least try to do our best to address the questions we have the best way, and just be proud of it because we've done that.
At some point, it comes down to a job, though, doesn't it? And that's the trouble. That, you know, what do you do if you're on soft money after soft money and you need a job?
So I can tell what we do in our lab, because of course we don't have the magic stick and give out good papers to everybody, and good papers take 5-6 years. So what we try to do is to get people to collaborate, because then you can share the burden. And then say that there are 3 people who can collaborate, then they can, okay, you have the responsibility, most of the responsibility in this paper, then you are the first author, maybe this other person did a tiny bit more and then can be star marked and then be the second first author. And then by these collaborations, then people can get beautiful PhDs and a job.
Thank you. Raquel, please.
Thank you. I'm Raquel Queiroz. I'm a medical student at the University of Fortaleza in the state of Ceará, Brazil. First of all, thank you very much for the inspiration that your work brings to all of us. The discoveries of how the brain decode space, time, and memory have been crucial to understand and to find brain disease. How do you see the contributions of neuroscience in the context of coronavirus pandemic? And do you believe that understanding the brain can help people to deal with difficult situations like the pandemic?
Well, that was extremely difficult, Rachel. So, of course, I believe that we need to understand the brain. And what we also know is that long-lasting effects of the COVID, that affects the brain. And to study that, to find out, can we prevent that, would also help, hopefully. So to understand the brain, that is, who are we and what goes wrong in our brains when we have a disease, either it's COVID or what it is. But also, I think that it helps, at least for me as a psychologist, to think about, okay, if I'm afraid one day, or if I'm angry, I know where it sits. And then I can blame that part and just be quiet. You see what I mean? Because I understand that this is not something that is coming from outside. It's in here. So I just have to deal with it myself. So I know that was a stupid way to say it, but I believe in understanding the brain. Maybe that was what I should have answered you.
So many fantastic topics and questions being brought up. I'm trying to ask questions in roughly the order they're appearing, but I'm sorry if you have to wait a long time, but we'll get to everyone. Lucas, please.
Good morning, good afternoon. I am Lucas. I study pharmacy at the Federal University of Mato Grosso. My question is, I'd like to ask you if you had any financial support throughout your researches, and if so, how did it help your studies? And I'd also like to ask if it got easier for you to get funding after the achievement of the Nobel Prize, and the recognition brought by it. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. So I'm from a poor family, and in Norway we have a system where we can get a loan from the state, from the government. So I survived on loans that I would have to pay back afterwards. And then so that was for my studies. But then as a PhD student, I applied together with Edward to the Research Council. And at that time in Norway, they wanted everyone to be equal. So that meant that since Edward and I applied the same year, we wanted to work on the same structure at that time, the hippocampus in the brain. We had the same supervisor. We were married. We didn't have children at that time, but that still we were too close. And we lived in Oslo. Then we shouldn't get, at least not both of us. And as I said, I was so naive. So I told my supervisor, of course we will get. And he tried to get me into applied science and study alcohol and so on. And I said, no, I believe in my questions and I want to do this. And then finally, both of us got, and it was an accident, probably. I don't know, but we got it. But before that, we were hungry because sometimes we didn't have food, and even with our two small children, then when we got 2 jobs, we didn't go for those 2 jobs before we knew that we could do the science that we wanted to do. So you can say that we have been extremely narcissistic when it comes to science. Let me do science, and then I forget about all the other things. But again, I've been spoiled, and I don't know who spoiled me. I was just very lucky.
And has the Nobel Prize made it easier to get money?
Yes and no, because I live in a country where if you have since it's equal, then you shouldn't have too much. So if you have something, you shouldn't get more. So in both ways, of course, the Nobel Prize, the beauty of the Nobel Prize is that it's a quality stamp. And then people start to believe that what we are doing is quality work, and that is what we are so proud of, that we really try to give out quality work. So that helps us. But of course, there's no guarantee. And Edward he just got a big grant from the ERC, but the year before they said no way. He wasn't even asked to come for an interview with the same questions. So yeah, that is science. It's difficult, it's awful, but it's so fun.
As you say, keep on trying, believe in yourself, just keep going, yeah.
Be naive, I think.
Roger, please.
Hello, I'm Roger Borges. I am a PhD student from the Federal University of ABC, located at the state of São Paulo. Science is a driving force for technological innovation which is one of the bases of economic development. However, since developing countries are underrepresented in science, they do not face the same technological innovation as developed countries do. In this sense, collaboration between developing and developed countries can play a significant role in the decrease of disparities and inequalities in our world. So my question is, how could we improve and promote the international scientific collaboration to decrease economic disparities and inequalities?
Thank you for that question, Roger. Again, I feel so stupid when I answer your wonderful questions, because I feel that I shouldn't address your questions in the way I do, but I see things only from my own perspective, and I have to apologize for that. But what we try to do is that we think that we could be a hatching institute. And if we then get people to us, we can train people in our scientific values so that these people can go back to their own countries and be missionaries and scientists at the same time, if you see what I mean. And we have been hatching people from so many countries, and we believe that that is the way to go. At least that is one way to try to help.
Thank you. Juliana, please.
Hello, it's such a great honor to be here. I'm Juliana Bustamante. I'm a PhD candidate at Health and Environment Program at Univille, University of Joinville Region in Santa Catarina State, Brazil. I would like to ask you, how do you think our disconnection from nature influence our perception and behavior towards environment and society?
Thank you, Helena, for that beautiful question. I think that to be close to nature and to have respect for the nature and for other human beings, that is the essential values for humanity. And that should be the essential values for science too. And that is also I work with animals. And since I do that, I need to respect the animals and treat them the best we can. So in our lab, we have the slogan that in order to have excellent science, you need happy animals and happy people. And in order to know when animals are happy, you have to know about the nature and how happy animals are in the nature. And you also have to protect the nature. And I speak to you coming from the most beautiful country with the most beautiful nature. And it's so important that science is connected to this and try to protect what we have, because it's so easy to ruin. So I would love if that would be possible. And there's so much we can learn. And as we talked about with Miguel, for example, even studying yeast, which is so low on the evolutionary tree, is so important for us. So to understand our nature is extremely important.
Thank you. Jessica, please.
Thank you. I'm Jessica Machado, and I'm a master's student in archaeology at Federal University of Recôncavo da Bahia. My question is, while in archaeology we interact with several fields of science, we mostly interact with the humanities. What are your thoughts about the contribution of humanities to science in general?
how do we define, because it's so huge, that field, so it depends on how we define this field. So to turn it around, then I think all topics in science are extremely important if they're done well. If the questions are good and the data are good, then I think all fields are extremely important. But exactly how? Maybe you have some ideas, Jessica, because I would love to hear.
I mean, anthropology and archaeology, and see how they can add to science, because we are so renegade for along the last century, and now science. How can we contribute more to physics and biology and the other sciences to think together?
Yeah, but I think you shouldn't think about how you should contribute. Think rather, how can the other fields contribute to your field to make it interesting, and so that you get excellent questions that you can address even with physics, if you collaborate with physics. And when it comes to anthropology and studies of all these things, there's so many ways to address questions. I think to have a diverse community studying such questions like you talk about is very interesting. But you answered your question yourself in a brilliant way. Thank you.
I got it. Thank you.
And Jessica's touching on such an important and enormous issue of the challenge of having every discipline represented and funded and appreciated, because there is a pecking order. And even, we've been arguing today for the value of science and keeping science going, but then keeping things going often comes at a cost, and somebody else says, well, okay, we'll keep science and we'll lose history or whatever. So that's a whole nother debate, which I guess, it's too big a topic for now, but it's absolutely intersecting with the conversation we're having now. So, Antonio, please.
Hello, everyone. I am Antonio Zezinski, and I am a PhD student of education in La Salle University in Rio Grande do Sul. So in our research program, we have been studying second language learning, and literature has shown the advantages of bilingual education over a monolingual one. So, Professor, my question is, what is the neuroscientific basis for bilingual education? Thank you.
Bilingual education, and so I maybe I didn't understand the question. So what can I? You said it so beautifully, but I don't understand how I should address your question. Sorry.
I mean the way, for example, we know there are parts of the brain that are responsible for second language learning, for a second language. So how we can use this in education, how we can use this to help improve also in our work, in our researches.
Yeah, then I have to wind back to my psychology studies. So at least what is important, as you know much better than I do, when you want to learn languages, is to try to learn it very early on, because that is the time when your brain is like a sponge for other languages. So I think that we have some countries in Europe where they are doing this dubbing. So they don't, so on television and movies, they don't let people be exposed to other languages except their own language. So and in those countries, then it was much more difficult for the students to learn English, for example. So that is very important that people are exposed to the different languages and very early on. And if people have, or if children have bilingual parents, for example, you can just see how elegantly they can switch between different contexts, and they excuse their parent who doesn't know Portuguese, for example, because then they start to translate to English or Norwegian or whatever. So that is one way that I'm thinking. And we know that, for example, Chinese and Japanese, they can't distinguish between R and L if they're not exposed to it very early on. Then they have to really work hard. So it's about the effort you put into learning a new language. Yeah.
Thank you. Talking of working hard, May-Britt, you're working very hard. We're going through all these questions at such a perfect pace. Thank you so much for these wonderful answers. And of course, continuing, let's continue with the questions. So Raquel, another Raquel, please.
Hi, Mai. Before anything, I must say that it's an honor for me to be here and talk to you. My name is Raquel Lubambo, and I study marine biology in Pontifical Catholic University of Rio. And as I work with scientific communication, my question for you is, considering the huge denialism in Brazil, in which researchers and scientists are not taken seriously, what do you think is the best and more efficient way for scientific communication to take?
So your field, for example, is perfect to get people curious. And I'm just thinking about exhibitions already. And as I told somebody else today, that when I was a child and people, my teachers brought me to the beach and started to tell about what I saw there, I was just in heaven. And to do that, and now with virtual reality and so on, you don't even need to go down to the beach. And if you can go down, since you have this diversity as you have in Brazil, you can just go there for an excursion and show them. And even adults, they can't stop thinking about that. This is just so exciting. So I think that to show, and then to explain, and then let people ask questions, and if it's possible to find answer to some of the questions, I think that is the way that people start to learn. And again, like we talked about earlier, we talked about these negative words that are so important, and important that we don't marry with these negative words, like denial. I realize that there are many people who don't want to know, but there are not so many. Many people are just either lazy or are not exposed, or at least not aggressive against knowing. So again, I think by just changing the way we are thinking about the word, and not thinking of that the word is full of people that are angry, it's full of denial, crisis, horrible. Let's celebrate. When we see a child with stars in the eyes and learning something, there's one child then. And if there's one, I can assure you there will be another one. And let's celebrate them.
Thank you. Romulo.
So, hi, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Romulo Neres. I'm a PhD candidate in immunology at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I study viral infections. And as Raquel said before, and also as you discussed earlier, denialism has been like a huge problem worldwide, Brazil included, as you discussed. And the problem is that the denialism is not only present in the population. sometimes even specialists, researchers that are considered to be experts in some field, they support denialist positions over other science topics. How would you deal or address the denialism inside the academy?
You know, like my dad said, people are the same or different, whatever they do. So even in academia, even older people, young people, people are people. And even among Nobel laureates, if we can put them on a stage, some of them are so stupid. and not like me, because you ask me question and I can't answer your questions in an intelligent way. So that is humans, that we are, some deny, some are aggressive, but we are so much more than only one thing. So I think about people like, do you have these blankets in Brazil that consist of small squares? So so it looks like a jigsaw puzzle. So I think of one human being as such a jigsaw puzzle. And one part of the puzzle has the label denial. And one has aggression, and one has stupidity, but sometimes there's also so much clever in the same person. So to just say, okay, even though it is a very well educated doctor in my hospital, or a professor who is showing denial. Okay, maybe not denial for everything. And then just ignore this ignorance and forgive that even the professor doesn't know better. And then maybe one day, this professor will change his or her mind. So, and I think also, if we start to look for denial or aggression or other things, we will see it. If we look for people who care, and even in the same person, suddenly people who didn't care before could suddenly start to care. Because I believe in this self-fulfilling prophecies. But I don't know. As I said, I really don't know. So what do you think yourself?
I think that, yeah, this is quite problematic when we try to think in situations like the one we are living now, the pandemics and this. Because we expect that everyone's going to just agree what usually evidence points. But yeah, as you said, we believe what we believe. Sometimes you cannot change what someone believes. And the main problem for me, it's not even the personality or the denialism trace in this person, is that usually this can resonate to the public, and the problem is when the overall population starts to look to this person as a reference in the field that, like, this person is denying or trying to discredit.
Yeah, but there are always annoying people, and if we give the stage to annoying people, then they will take it. So if we ignore the annoying people and rather believe, okay, if this person denies that there is a virus that is dangerous, then I don't deny it. And I can tell, again, a few people. And if you can rescue a few people by telling them, be careful, that is so fantastic. Then don't care about this person that denies it, because it's not your duty to change the person who is not willing to change. It's your duty to try to help those people that there is hope for, that will change. And then you can help maybe 2 or 3 people. And if all of you do that in the whole Brazil, the Brazil will finally just end up with the 3-4 denial people. And the rest will, maybe, we hope.
Yeah,
pray.
we hope.
We pray for you.
Lovely thought. We are absolutely out of time, but there's one question from a Lucas who hasn't asked a question before. So if you could just go, just very quick question, very quick answer, May-Britt.
Thank you. My name is Lucas Ribeiro. I am studying bioprocess and biotechnology engineer at São Paulo State University. My question is about the COVID-19 situation and the other infectious disease. I think that the global health crisis which we're living in has shown that the solution for new era problems depends on scientific knowledge. In my opinion, biotechnology itself has a fundamental role in battling COVID-19, and it's probably one of your main weapons to fight against the next world problems. In your opinion, how can we as a scientific community stop future pandemics and stop disease outbreaks in their early stage, being that they could happen anywhere in the world?
Thank you for that question. So I think, again, one science direction cannot rescue humans. We need psychologists who can change the mind of denial people. We need to understand how things work. And we need biotechnology, we need physics in order to understand these processes. And then there are more specific questions, as we talked about yeast. We need to understand yeast in order to understand how these viruses work and so on. So there are specific questions, and then there are more global questions. And science is necessary for all these questions in order to stop pandemic. And we also, and we need political science, because what we haven't been touching and we don't want to touch is politics. But we need to do something with that too. And the way we do something with that is to believe in the good and believe in science.
Thank you, May-Britt. So we must stop. But first of all, May-Britt, thank you for working so terribly hard and answering all these amazingly good questions. I think we've been so privileged to listen to such thoughtful questions expressed so eloquently. And for you who's not visited Brazil, this has been particularly like a tour of Brazil, that you've gone to every different region, pretty much. Now, I am aware that Bianca, who is raising her hand, is the only person in the whole lot who hasn't actually asked a question. So Bianca, we'd love to hear from you. We've got to finish, but quickly.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Sorry, I was trying to raising my hands, but I also have an issue here. So, hi everyone, I'm Bianca. I'm from the Federal University of São Carlos in the state of São Paulo, and I'm a 4th-year PhD student in organic chemistry. And actually, my question goes in the same direction that the others' questions. So, the international scientific partnerships are very important, especially for the developing countries to strengthen their research base. So I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, how to motivate the developed or middle-income countries to establish these collaborations in a reward system that prioritizes number and, of course, the quality of publications? And what should you say to underrepresented students or researchers from these developing countries who'd like to apply to a top-ranked university?
And I think that will be the last question. So I'd like just to say that it's a really big honor for all of us to share this space with you, May, to discuss about such important topic, especially given the current scenario in our country. So we want to thank the event organizing committee for such a wonderful meeting. Thank you.
Bianca, beautifully phrased. And your question was so big and so important. And I'm going to give May-Britt about 10 seconds to say something. So good luck, May-Britt.
Yeah, so again, I send the responsibility back to you. You have to be proud of yourself. You have to be proud of the science you're doing and show off, because then if you believe in yourself, believe in your questions, then you can build something that is unique. And I believe in you.
Thank you, May-Britt. Well, I'm sorry, but we really have to stop. From my perspective, what an honor to have been part of this. It's been a joy. Thank you all so very much. And thank you to the audience who've been with us.
And thank you for being so kind with me.
So yes, wave goodbye to the audience. And what's going to happen now is there's going to be another short break before we meet Serge Haroche for another discussion with another group of students. What's going to be shown during the break is a panel discussion, a short panel discussion from a 2017 dialogue. And it's on the question of, it continues with the same theme set by David Gross. It's the question of what is scientific truth. On it are two Nobel laureates, the immunologist Peter Doherty and the economist Joe Stiglitz, and also Helga Novotny, who is the former president of the European Research Council, who have just funded the grant that May-Britt mentioned that Edvard has just received in a beautifully neat sewing up of the end of this. So thank you to you all, and please let's roll the video. Bye-bye.
Okay.
You are a biologist. Do you have any different view, perhaps, of scientific truth?
Well, not really. I mean, David's exposition was great because what it brings it back to is reality. I mean, what we're trying to do is deal with reality and understand reality. And reality is real. There's no doubt about that. As a biomedical scientist, I'm interested in I'm a disease and death person, a very cheerful position to be in. I work on infection and immunity. I'm concerned with cancer. And the realities are there. If you've got colon cancer, it's a reality. If you've got melanoma, it's a reality. If you have pancreatic cancer, it's a reality, and you'll soon be dead. So we understand that. Truth is not a word that we use. In 50 years, as a biomedical science, I've never stood up in front of an audience and said, the truth is, what I say is our best understanding is that. What the data tells us is that. Now, through that process that David discussed, which is the process of, particularly in biomedical science, not so much big theory, as you have in physics, because you have the laws of physics. Biology is beset by evolution. And evolution is a process where, as the creatures have become more complex, we've built on pre-existing structures. So it's like an old house in Gothenburg that's built in the 16th century. And in the 20th century, you have to install plumbing. I mean, you're not doing it the ideal way. If we did it the ideal way, we'd have 4 hearts. So we don't die of a heart attack, okay? But we don't do it that way. So basically, what we try to understand is that underlying reality of this particular situation. And often what we get to in science, in biomedical science, through experimentation, through testing, often through rather ad hoc type testing of late, with no great theoretical concept behind it, is a solution, or what looks like a partial solution. And the solution is whether you live or you die. And that's a pretty good solution for most of us. And we don't have a lot of quarrels with that. Even Mr. Trump doesn't quarrel with the idea of being live or dead. I mean, I don't want to expand on that. But basically, often when we get a solution, we don't fully understand what's happening when we move on. Because that problem is no longer a major issue for us. So that's a kind of a bit different from the physicist who's got an overarching theory. And of course, in the end, everything comes back to the laws of physics.
sorry, okay, that was beautiful. I hesitate to stop you, but
Yes.
so you're right. Scientists may not use the term truth, but people out there do all the time, and they equate scientific reality with scientific fact, and they want to hold on to scientific fact. Helga, what's the relationship between fact and truth in science?
Well, allow me to bring in perhaps a European perspective, because we have heard very much about Donald Trump, and of course he also has an impact on what happens in the rest of the world. But from a European perspective, I was struck by the fact that in the American discourse, by and large, you speak about post-truth. And in Europe, we speak about post-fact. And there is a slight difference. Now, truth and facts are not the same. I think we agree on that. And it may have to do with the fact that you have creationism in the US. You have very little creationism in Europe, not worth to speak of. You have many more evangelicals, while Europe, by and large, thinks of itself and is a much more secular continent. And therefore, I think we have to look also at the relationship between science and democracy. And what people, at least in Europe, in this post-factual age, are questioning is, and we have seen it in Britain, we see it in many other parts, is scientists are seen as being part of the establishment and part of the elite. Now, we are part of the elites, there's no question about it, but I think we have to not to be over defensive. Now we have to stand up, and defend truth by saying every time this is scientific truth. I think we have to understand what people are really protesting against, why they feel left behind, and so on. And it is not that they are questioning, I mean, there are some, and I think they are mainly in the US, there are some that question scientific truth, but by and large, people want to dispute facts because they do not fit the context in which they live. And part of the answer to David's very relevant question, how can we stand up to it, I think has to do with trying to make sense of facts and put them into context, that people understand the context and can relate to the context. I know this will not solve all problems. There is always a minority that will continue. Liars cannot be convinced by any argument. We know all that. But I think one way forward would really be how can we bring science and democracy again closer together, because I think David is fully right. Science and democracies are allies, and without science, democracy will not progress at all, and science needs democracy as a way to hold up the very strong belief in the freedom of inquiry. Without that belief, and this is something that society must support and stand behind it, science will also be hampered.
Thank you. Joe, do you want to comment?
Well, I'm an economist with social science, which is, some people don't really think is a science at all. But we have a problem that is actually much worse than what you described, because there are many people who are motivated not to believe the truth. So you might say, if you're the Koch brothers and you have a lot of investments in coal, you have an incentive not to believe in climate change. And you have an incentive to try to convince all Americans that climate change is not real. It's an inconvenient truth, but it's also a very costly truth. So there has been a wholesale assault on our institutions of science. And this has been compounded by two other factors going in. One is the role of ideology, that at the core of economics is a belief that does the market work. And that's very ideological. And those who want to believe in free market do not want to look at evidence that's contrary to that. So you have a strong ideology, a little bit like the evolutionary ideology, and in the United States there's a particular problem. A very large fraction of Americans still do not believe in evolution, just like they don't believe in climate science. So you have to overcome this ideology. And finally, there is this populism today in the United States, where, if you want to use that word, this notion that a large fraction of Americans have been left behind. And they associate that with an establishment, that's what you said, and they associate that establishment with a belief in these truth institutions, the universities, and a majority of the Republican Party in surveys think that universities are a bad thing.
Yeah.
Now, when you have a majority of one of the two parties thinking that the institutions of knowledge are undermining society and are a bad thing, you have a problem as a society.
So that's fascinating. Yes, please, quickly. Good.
So Joe, what seems to me to drive the American dynamic more than any other thing? I mean, obviously there's the bad actors who are in it, like the Koch brothers, because of it's their financial interest. But really, it seems to me that the thing that is most critical is the belief system in no tax, no regulation, free market economies. And that basically, if you're going to do something about climate change, firstly, you need taxes, and secondly, you need regulation. And this is why it is so deeply threatening to the basic business American psyche. And that, to me, is a religion.
Yeah, it is a religion, and almost immune to evidence. So right now we've been through this big thing about tax cuts. People appeal to supply-side measures that this will stimulate the economy. We had an experiment, not a controlled experiment in the way that we were talking about earlier today, but you might say an experiment under Reagan where we lowered taxes. There were predictions made what would happen, both at the macro level, what would happen to GDP, and at the micro level in terms of savings and labor supply. All those predictions were refuted. And yet, after all the evidence comes in, the same arguments are brought out, and you say, how could they do that? And it comes to a religion where it can't be refuted.
Yeah, but, and here reality comes back in again. Reality will also hit this kind of religion. Yeah. Social reality, economic reality, the global reality of the world we live in with all its interconnected financial streams, etc. At one point, it takes time, but at one point it will hit back.
Yeah, I hate to be a pessimist because my life has been about optimism and change, but we had the reality of the 2008-2009 crisis. I mean, you couldn't have more reality than that. And yet, the large number of particularly macroeconomists who believe in the same models that brought us to this crisis, that has not changed. That religion has been dented, but not fundamentally changed.
Some of us say unkind things about economists because of that. It's very interesting, I think. There's kind of an attack on science. And, but also, I think there's an assumption within that whole establishment that science will solve the issue, will solve the problem. That's what's expected in medical science. You don't get much problem getting Republicans, for instance, to support biomedical research. They're all pretty stupid and they want to live forever, okay? Basically. And so that's not an issue. They're not really against science. They're against science, which is inconvenient to them. But the question I pose to them is, we are enormously clever about science. We have tremendous people, tremendous intellects. You heard one of them earlier, and of course the philosopher earlier who was speaking. Yes, and wonderful. But when is the last time that we made it rain, and when is the last time that we made it stop raining? And I think that's where we should start. We are relatively powerless in the force and face of nature.
Can I just suggest that last thing? Okay. There's actually more of an anti-science deep in the conservative movement. They don't want the collection of data that might counter their beliefs. Yeah. So they've actually been trying to suppress science. And the most important thing was one of the things that was emphasized this morning, which is knowledge is tentative. And the scientific knowledge is tentative. And they're trying, I thought David put it very well, we're competing with liars who are selling the notion of false confidence in the truth. And we're trying to explain that there is uncertainty, but there are certain things that we know are true, that climate change is very, very, very likely.
Okay, if the timekeeper lets it go, everything falls apart. All right, last word to you, Helga. Go on.
Let me just quote Bernard Russell. He said the problem with the world is only fanatics and fundamentalists are always certain. Wise people have doubts. Thank you.
Perfect. Hello again and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that panel discussion, and now welcome to this roundtable discussion with Serge Haroche. Again, we have a group of students selected very rigorously from many different regions of Brazil, and it's an absolute joy to see all these faces on screen again. Welcome to you all, and thank you for taking part. And thank you too for the audience for staying with us. This is a long affair. We're coming into our third hour. So for those of you who've been with us throughout, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Right, on with the questions. It's your chance to ask Serge anything you like. So who has the first question? Boxes jumping around. Andressa, please.
Hi, my name is Andressa. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Serge. I'm doing a PhD in biotechnology at Federal University of Alagoas. And my question is, what do you think that we can do to make science more accessible, more understandable to society? I think that we as scientists, we do not speak easily language that society can understood.
Yeah, I think it's an important question because scientists are part of society, and it's clear that we need the trust of society, and society has to understand that science is important, that science has values which go beyond science, because we are trying to show that truth is important, that rational thinking is important, that to find solutions to the problems that mankind is facing, society needs science. And so what I think what should be done, of course, is to have a good education for children, for young people. It has to start with young people. So what I am doing when I can is to go and to talk to elementary school or middle school and high school students, try to explain to them the value of science, give some simple examples, maybe talk about the history of science, because the history of science teaches us a lot of things about the value of science, the way science proceeds, the importance of collaboration between people, the fact that science is universal, that science does not have boundaries and borders. So all these efforts have to be done, of course. And I think it's important that scientists do not remain closed, talking to themselves, but that they try to open to society. I understand it's not easy because science is becoming less and less intuitive, and you cannot do science without making efforts to understand things in a deep way. And for example, in physics, it needs mathematical skills. and you cannot, you can use images, you can try to bring children towards science by playing games, but at some point you need, people need to make an effort to bridge the gap between ordinary knowledge and scientific knowledge. And this effort is, I understand, is difficult, but it's necessary. And we have to, it's not easy, but there are ways to make young people aware that science is important. We have to try to wake up their curiosity, their amazement to the fact that the universe is full of interesting questions, and through that we can bring maybe people to science. There's a lot of science which is appealing to the imagination of people. Astrophysics, the research for exoplanets and life far from Earth. All these are very big questions about life, biology, neurosciences about the brain, open up to a lot of questions which might appeal to young people if the question are asked in the right way.
Thank you. Antonio, you have a follow-up.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Adam and Professor Haroche. My name is Antonio Capanema. I'm a physics PhD student at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro. And my question follows exactly the same topic that we were just discussing. I would just like to narrow it down a little bit, I guess, into physics, which is your field and my field. And physics can sometimes seem relatively disconnected from our everyday lives due to its complexity and especially fundamental physics research. My question is, in the same sense, how would you address this issue to the general public, not only to spread scientific literacy, but also to make a case for funding physics researchers?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think one has to stress the fact that fundamental physics is the background on which applied physics is built up. And you can give a lot of examples, simple examples to the general public, tells them that technologies that they are using in their everyday life without asking any questions about it, in fact, come from fundamental science. I often take the example of the GPS, trying to explain to people that every taxi driver in the world is using the GPS. And the GPS is a marvel which is based on quantum physics, because atomic clocks are based on the laws of quantum physics, and the GPS would not work if it did not incorporate special and general relativity, the fact that the clocks which are orbiting in satellites have a time which elapses at different rate because they are not in the same gravitational field, or they're not at the same speed. And if these corrections were not taken into account, the GPS would be worthless because it will be off by kilometers. So I take this as an example, and you can multiply the examples, and just to show to people that all the technologies which they take for granted come from basic science, and that at the origin of all this, the questions which were asked were curiosity-driven questions. When Einstein developed the theory of relativity, he had no idea that one day there would be a GPS. He did that, and the GPS came after that. And the same is true about the laser, which was also an original idea by Einstein. It took half a century before this came to fruition. So this also illustrates the fact that there is a long time scale, that the science evolves over many, many years. And you have to give this feeling also to people who are not scientists, so that they will understand why you have to fund, why society has to fund research over long periods of time for this to be fruitful.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's go to Fernando.
Hello, I'm Fernando Durria, 24 years old, PhD student from the Federal University of the State of Rio de Janeiro in Rio, researching about artificial intelligence and its interaction with society. My current research is about automatic detection of fake news. Professor Haroche, quantum physics is entangling with computer science lately. How do you think quantum computing will be contributing to the efforts of research in times of crisis like the ones we are living now? I mean, should we expect faster tests, facilitated simulations, or any improvements in research processes?
Yeah, you are asking the general question of the quantum computer, and that's a difficult. It's very difficult to predict what will happen. In fact, as you know, the idea of the quantum computer is to use the strange logic of quantum physics in order to speed up some kind of calculations, to use the fact that a quantum computer would work along many passes at once, and that the answer to the question, the answer to the solution of the algorithm would come from an interference between all these passes. So this is a very nice, very beautiful idea which has been developed over the last 30 or 40 years. The problem is to build a machine, a hardware machine which would implement this. And the problem is decoherence, the fact that the quantum superposition are very fragile, very sensitive to the environment. And if you want a computer to work, you have to be able to protect the system from these perturbations and to develop what is known as quantum error corrections. And all this is subject of a lot of fundamental research now. And there are many candidates for quantum bits working in quantum computers. And for the time being, it remains still a dream. It's not clear how the machine will work. There will be, if the machine works one day, there will be connection with artificial intelligence, but it's quite clear that the quantum algorithm could be used for in the building deep learning algorithms, and this is really the dream. But what makes the research so appealing is that you never know what will happen, and it's very well possible that all the research which is going on today will lead to things that we are not imagining today. And this happened in the past a lot of time, and it's very well possible that the quantum computer will not be what we imagine. There is another line of research, which is quantum simulators, making artificial systems which behave like real systems, but at a different scale. And these quantum simulators could be used to solve some problems that classical computer cannot solve now. And so all this research is very active in the world, and it needs resources, it needs bright people going into this field. But I think the danger is to oversell. If you tell people there will be a quantum computer in 5 years or 10 years from now, and if this does not happen, it will be very bad for the field. So we have to be honest to say that it is still basic science and that we don't know exactly what will happen, but this is fascinating and interesting. And this is the connection between basic science and applied science is a very subtle one. It may take a lot of time. And the example I gave to the previous question, the time it took between general relativity and the GPS was almost 1 century. But you have to build up on all what you know for applications. And what is sure is that applications will come. And it's also sure that if we don't do basic science, then there will be no applied science at all. So we have to go through these stages.
Thank you very much indeed. And that whole question of building up false expectations is very much connected with the questions we were talking about earlier, how to get people in general to value science. But now there are quite a lot of hands waving at me for follow-ups. So let me try and get it right. Victor, Jose, you were wanting to come in now, please.
Thank you, Adam. I'm Victor Silva, PhD candidate in Science and Technology Policy at the University of Campinas, located in the state of São Paulo. My question, Professor Haroche, you emphasize in your book that science needs good instruments, but researchers increasingly point to artificial intelligence as more than a tool. In addition to providing predictive and prescriptive insights, it takes autonomous decisions. So does being an autonomous agent mean that in the near future, it could receive credit for its own scientific discoveries? And how the scientific community would react to this?
I would like to make sure that I understood what you mean is that will artificial intelligence be able to do research by itself and receive funding to do that?
To receive the credit for discoveries, for finding patterns and so on.
I think also the question of whether artificial intelligence will one day get the Nobel Prize, I suppose.
Yeah, so I am very dubious about that. I think artificial intelligence is a way to process enormous amount of data and to do things that would take much more time for human brains to do, but the human brain keeps the freedom to choose the question, to address the issues. And I think and I hope that artificial intelligence will not overcome imagination and creativity of real people. It's a fantastic tool to help us doing things. For instance, the fact that you can use now artificial intelligence to translate one language into another one is something which was unbelievable only a few years ago and becomes now more and more precise and better. The fact that cars could be driven, would drive themselves alone, and all this is just processing information at a very fast rate. But I don't think that what really involves creativity, imagination and creativity will be possible with that. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I discussed with people who are knowledgeable in artificial intelligence and people who have been working in this field, and they agree with what I am just saying. So I am not working in this field, but I would be very surprised if a machine would overtake the human brain in this respect.
Now, we might revisit these topics in a minute, but I'm just going to jump somewhere else. Ana Luisa, do you want to ask your question, please?
Thanks. I'm Ana Luisa Tiberio, and I'm graduated in law and I'm studying accounting at the University of São Paulo. Science is often associated only with biological and exact sciences. In Brazil, even the humanities area has been the most affected by cut of scholarships and investment. But as a jurist and an accounting student, I do not agree with that. And you, doctor, do you believe social science is also science? How do you believe we from the social science can contribute to national development?
Thank you for the question. I think it's very important. I think culture and civilization is a whole. It's science and social science, philosophy and humanities are going together. And in fact, in the past history, it has been shown that science and social science and humanities in general are part of the same endeavor of humanity. If you start in the 17th century, a philosopher like Descartes was also a physicist, and the development of the scientific method has been linked to philosophical thoughts back in the antiquity, and then during the Renaissance and the years of the Enlightenment also. Free thinking is very important. The fact that freedom of thought and freedom of thinking and of discussing is essential for science to develop. And I think it's very important that a critical mind, the possibility to decide what is right and what is wrong, what is truth and what is lies, is something which comes from a general education, not only science, but all goes together. And I agree that it's very bad that humanities are under funded, and that governments have a tendency to decrease the funding in these fields. It's also very important because people will be politicians and political people who would be in charge of society have to also to understand what science is about. So you have to keep a link between science and humanities if you want to have in charge people who find that the values of science, that the importance of rational thinking is essential. So I think that countries, democratic countries, have this big advantage over countries where there is no freedom, because the mind of people are more open, and there is, I think it's very important for the creativity and for the imagination to be able to flourish. So I really believe that this is important. Even if you are a scientist, you have to understand how your field has evolved over the centuries. And so science cannot be completely disconnected from the history of science, the history of ideas, the history of philosophy. All this goes together.
Thank you very much indeed, Serge. Mariana, may we come to you now?
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Mariana Fronza. I am a PhD student in biotechnology at Federal University of Pelotas, representing the state of Rio Grande do Sul. So, Professor Serge, I would like to ask you to follow me and go back in time at the end of the Second War and the death of millions of people. Paul Valery illustrated the thought of the period with the sentence, "We civilizations now know ourselves mortal." What is, in your perspective, the great lesson in science that COVID-19 pandemic leaves for our society?
You made this quotation from Valery is very well known, and of course it followed the Second War and the atomic bomb, which was used at the end of the war, and so we got the feeling at that time that for the first time in history, man has the power to destroy or to affect in a very important way the fate of our planet. And this has happened since in other fields. Before the pandemic, we have the global warming, the fact that we have entered what we can call the Anthropocene, a new era of the planet where the human activities have a very deep impact on the planet. And at the same time, and you have the pandemics, which are also somewhat related to that because they are linked to the fact that the viruses which were trapped into animals are now going into humankind, because there is the boundary between the animal world and the human world have been somewhat relaxed by the globalization and by the fact that the environment is being destroyed, and all this affects the planet, and this is, I think, this is a big challenge that mankind has to face during the next decades. The fact that we have to do something now, and we have also to take into account that the system has a lot of inertia built in it. So what we do will have an effect only after many years, but we have to take this into consideration. And the big danger is the fact that we have all these conspiracy theory denials of what's going on, the fact that there are a lot of fake news, the fact that there are people who prefer not to face what is going on because it's disturbing them. And so it's a big problem. And I think the young generation, what your generation has an essential role to play into that. First, to understand the issues, and then you have to solve them. And I'm afraid that the older generation is putting a lot of burden on you, because we should have acted before on these issues. It's clear that the situation is difficult, but there are solutions. There are solutions. It's clear that physics and chemistry can bring solution to the energy issue, to the fact that we have to get rid of fossil fuels. It's clear that biology and biotechnologies are essential, and the example of the vaccine, the success in getting vaccines within 1 year is a fantastic illustration of that. And it also illustrates the fact that there is a very deep connection between basic science and applications, and you need, all has to go together. Science is, of course, neutral. Science is neither good nor bad. It gives us knowledge, and then we have to decide what we do with the knowledge. And I think that's what Valéry had in mind when he talked about the bomb issue in the 1940s. So it's really, I think, the main challenge that mankind is facing today.
I remember reading in a Feynman article a quote that the same discoveries that open the gates of heaven also open the gates of hell.
Yeah.
It's
yeah. You can think of the internet, which is wonderful for communication, but which also is a nest for all these conspiracy theories.
Pedro, please.
Thank you, Adam. It's a great honor to be here. My name is Pedro Pinheiro Cabral. I study physics at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. And my question for you, Professor Haroche, is during my studies in astrophysics, I learned that the sun has solar storms and that a superstorm could disrupt almost all modern technology we take for granted, as the GPS you mentioned. We could go days without technologies we rely on. So governments and companies such as banks and in the developed world in general have crisis plans for if this happens. I'm now doing a traineeship in a big Brazilian bank and have found that no Brazilian bank or government have plans in place. Executives aren't even aware of the risk. What can we do to make sure governments and companies take science seriously to protect us all from the next disaster, such as a pandemic or solar superstorm?
Thank you very much indeed, Pedro. Now we have to find out whether we still have Serge with us. We've lost his image, but do we still have his voice?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, beautifully.
Have you lost the image?
Yes.
Hi, Serge, it's Nick here. I'll just try to help with that a little bit. It might be that you can just change your video. It may be that the camera's run out of batteries. So it might be that if you change your video on Zoom back to the inbuilt camera, then that will get us out of this problem.
Okay, so I go
next to the little stop video icon. You can probably select the other video.
I have
the other camera.
Let me try to do that.
While he does this, I can introduce Nick, the technical wizard behind all this that's making it all work.
FaceTime camera, okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Perfect. We can see you again. I'll say goodbye. If you want to tilt it up, Serge, slightly so that it's not cutting off the rest of your body. There you go. Perfect.
Like that? Okay.
Maybe tilt it down just a tiny bit more so we can see a bit more of you, but it's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Serge. Okay, so Pedro was asking, what can we do to make sure that people take the future risk seriously, whether it's the risk of a pandemic or the risk of a solar storm knocking out all known forms of communication?
I think that, first of all, you have to try to evaluate the risk, the probability of the risk. You quoted the risk of solar storms. There is also a risk that at some point the Earth's magnetic field the North Pole, magnetic pole will go to the South Pole, and then this will be a huge disruption in the kind of shield that we have from solar particle showers, and this will have also a terrible effect on all communication. You can also think of an asteroid colliding with the Earth, but the probability of these events to happen in the near future are very small, because these are events which happen on geological scales. What is much more probable is the risk of a new pandemic, because this might accelerate because of the conditions that we see today. And the risk also of a nuclear holocaust is very important, because there is a huge quantity of nuclear weapons all over the world. And some people have evaluated the risk of about 1% per year, which means that over the next century, this might really happen. And so these are the kind of risks we have to take into account, with, of course, the risk of the global warming, which is happening at a slow pace, but which is happening. So these are really the problems that we have to face, and the government have to face these risks. And we have to live with that, and we have to take the measures that we can take for the risks that we know. Like now, I hope that we will have learned about the pandemic, and that when it will happen next time, the answer will be more rational. But we have to make sure that the other risks are also taken care of. And we live in a dangerous world, that's clear.
Thank you. Thank you for all your lovely questions. And I'm sorry that you have to wait a while to ask them, but we'll get to you. Tassia, please. You're on mute.
I'm sorry for that. It's a pleasure to chat to you today, Professor. And I'm Tassia, and I'm a PhD student, pharmaceutical science at the Federal University of Furnas, located in the state of Minas Gerais. And my question is, we already talked about how can we disclose the science for the society, how the government can face all of this crisis, but my question is more about the value of the science. So how do we know that we are on the path of producing a science of value? Is there any magic formula or strategic for that? I mean, how to develop our full potential to make it happen?
That's a difficult question. First of all, you have to ask yourself the right question, to understand that there is an issue at some point, that there's a question that you want to answer, and to try to find the ways to answer that. How do you find out whether you're on the good path or not? It then depends upon many factors. First of all, is what you are doing of interest for other people too? What you have to discuss with people, you have to communicate with people to make sure that the questions that you are asking yourself, other people are asking themselves too. And you have to, of course, it's a risky business. If you are on an ambitious project, it means that it might fail, and you have to learn from your failures. You have to learn from the fact that you might be on a dead track, and that you have to change direction. I guess it's also in part a question of luck. You very often in a research career, you just find something that you did not expect, and 9 times out of 10, what you did not expect is just an artifact, not very important, but sometimes it's a surprise which leads to something really new. So you need some luck, but one of the quality of a researcher is that to be able to recognize when he stumbles on something which is new. And so you have to be able to take advantage of your luck, and that's also something important. But at the beginning, you have to be enthusiastic and to have a passion for what you are doing. So, and this passion is something which builds up very early in the career of a scientist, and very often it starts with when you are a child or a young student, and it's something which has to be nurtured and nourished by society, and it's why I think education is so important.
Thank you very much, Serge. Now I have 2 follow-ups for this one. I'll come to Daphne in a second, but first, William.
Hello, Professor. It's an honor to be here. My name is William. I'm a materials engineering student at the Federal University of Jequitinhonha and Mucuri Veils in Janaúba, Minas Gerais. And I'd like to ask you, following the question of our colleague, how do you see the impacts of the latest developments on quantum physics and physics in general in our developments in technology, what can we expect of technology in the future years, in your opinion?
Yeah, in quantum technology, you can expect progresses in quantum communication, the fact that you can use photons to communicate between people in a way which can be protected from spying. It's called quantum cryptography, and it's already working. You can also develop new tools, new probes of small magnetic or electric field, new clocks which measure time with a higher precision than before. And this could be useful for geodesic applications, for prediction of earthquakes, for instance. I often take the example of these optical clocks. Now, atomic clocks are now based, count the periods of electrons in atoms, and the standard clock now is a microwave clock, which counts 9 billion periods per second. But now we are developing new clocks which count the period of an optical transition, which is 5 orders of magnitude higher. And these 5 orders of magnitude translate into a 5 or 6 order of magnitude improvement in the precision of clocks. We have now clocks which have a precision of less than 1 second in the age of the universe. So it means that if 2 clocks had been synchronized 13 billion years ago, they would not deviate from one another by more than a fraction of a second. Such clocks would make it possible to develop a super GPS kind of system which would be sensitive to a change of time corresponding to a change in altitude of the clock of a few millimeters. And with this kind of precision, which is general relativity effect, you could make fantastic improvement in the survey of the Earth, for instance, see how the level of the water, the level of the oceans, or the width of the ice cap is changing with time. So you could study a lot of things, a lot of physical parameter with an increased precision. So communication, metrology, of course, there is a hope of a quantum computer verifying the future, quantum simulators. But again, I think maybe the most surprising application cannot be predicted. You know, there have been, at the beginning of the 20th century, when the before quantum physics, when people have started with cinema and telephone and light bulbs, there was a big hope that the progress of science would be fantastic in the future. And people have been asked in 1900, what would be the life of people in the year 2000? And postcards were published everywhere in France, in Germany, in England. And what they predicted was ridiculous. Nobody had predicted the lasers, the computers, the atomic clock, the MRI, and so on. What people were doing was extrapolating better movies, better telephone systems. Even the airplane was not predicted. What they predicted is that transportation would be made by balloons and by, so it's very hard to predict the future, especially in technology. And what I can tell you today might be as ridiculous in 50 years from now. That's what I just said. That's the charm of research. You know, you find out things that you did not think about.
Thank you. Daphne.
Hello there, my name is Daphne Rosa. For me, it's an honor to be here. I'm an undergraduate student of mathematics in the Federal University of the Great Dourados, located in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. And my question for you today, Professor Haroche, it's more of a follow-up as well. Whenever you are doing a research or questioning a theory, again, how do you know you are going to the right direction? But if you do not pursue it, the value of science will remain still for you.
What you mean is that can you learn from your failures? Can you learn from the fact that some things that you are doing are not successful? And this happens all the time. It's clear that if you have a theory which is not, have an idea which is not followed up by observation, and if what you observe differs from what the theory is predicted, you have to change it and you have to go in another direction. But what you learn from there can be useful. And this happened a lot of time in the history of sciences. For instance, what is light? The fact that light is, at the beginning, Newton believed that the light was a stream of particles. And then what has been discovered is that the light, in fact, was a wave, which gave rise to interference effects. And in the 19th century, people believed that light was made of waves and that the particle idea was ridiculous. And then at the beginning of 20th century, Einstein came with the first idea about the quantum. And he came back to the idea that after all, light was also made of particles, and the photon came back into the picture. And then there was a kind of a mix between the particle and the wave aspect. And so it's, you know, how things evolve and how an idea which is supposed to be wrong at some point can come back in the forefront of science later on. So in fact, science is made of this kind of succession of hypotheses, ideas which might be found to be wrong at some point, and then which come back under another perspective. And well, here I am talking about the grand scale, about the history of science, but at the personal level, when you do research, the same thing may happen, that you do something which happen to be a dead alley and doesn't give result, but what you have done in between, you have learned, maybe you have learned some experimental skills, maybe you have learned some calculation skills, which will be helpful when you will go in another direction and find something which is closer to the truth. But the real truth is always escaping you, because there are always new ideas which come up, and the truth is evolving all the time. So you have to be, of course, at some point, it's good to be in the right direction. You cannot do always mistakes. You have at some point.
So let me throw in a quick follow-up from me. How do you know, as a young scientist, whether you're banging your head against the wall doing something that just is never going to work, or whether it's actually worth keeping going because there's something there if you could just find it?
I think it's very difficult to answer that question. You need to have a kind of intuition that what you are doing must be in the right direction, but you have also not, I think one part of the answer is that you have to try not to be always alone. You have to interact with people. You have to interact with colleagues, with students of the same generation as you, and you have to be lucky enough to have a good mentor and to have someone who can at least direct you, tell you whether he or she thinks that you are in the right track and give you some hints. So it's not, and it's less and less now an individual adventure. It's something which you share, and usually the research is made in a group, more or less small. Of course, if you think about the big projects, accelerator projects or astrophysical observatories, then it's huge group of thousands of people. But in my case, the research group is made of 10 to 20 people. Most of them are young postdoc and graduate students and a few colleagues. And one way to know whether you are on a good track or not is to discuss with your colleagues. Of course, you have to read the literature. You have to make sure that what you do is in the stream. Or if you do something really new, that it will interest other people. That's part of it. And you have also to go to meetings and to conferences and workshops. And now it's rather limited now, but I hope that next year the young scientists will be able to meet again and to discuss again together.
Okay, thank you. Lots of questions to get through. Jadson, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jadson. I am a mechanical engineering student at INSPER in the state of São Paulo. And my question for you, Professor Haroche, is how can we build a way to share research findings that don't involve paying so much money to scientific magazines?
You mean to publish your research? I think that's an important issue. You have to find. I think it's not normal that the scientific magazines charge a lot of money for the people who want to publish, and even not. It's not good also that they charge a lot of money to people who want to read and to access to literature. And I think that there are now a lot of efforts which are made for online access, free online access of published work. And this has started in physics, called the archives. For the last 20 years, you can just post your research on these archives for free and people can access them on the internet. I know it starts in biology too, but it does not solve all the problems, because one important part of the publication is a peer review, the fact that the work has to be evaluated by peers. And so one have to find an equilibrium between free publication and the internet where anyone can post anything, and the fact that the things has to be evaluated by peers. And I know that there is a lot of projects now try to combine these two points. And again, we come to the fact that the internet can be the best of things and the worst of things at the same time. You have to use the internet in a good and balanced way, and that's something which requires a lot of thought and a lot of attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Julia, please, Julia Rocha.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I am Julia. I'm a physics student at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And as a physics student, it is common to hear from different people outside this universe of science that science should always respond quickly and that more fundamental research does not impact society very much. As a scientist in a very fundamental field, have you ever had times when you doubted the importance of what you were doing?
What you say is right. A lot of people who don't understand what science is about say that science has to be useful, and they don't understand that usefulness is not just a short-term quality, that science becomes useful after a lot of years of fundamental research before that. And so there is a lot of things to be said about the usefulness of useless science. And many people have published papers or opinion pieces about that. In fact, for instance, the Institute of Advanced Physics in Princeton was funded by, in the 1930s, the place where Einstein has been appointed when he left Germany. This is a place where basic science has been advocated from the beginning. And the guy who founded this institute used to say that in fact, useless science is something which will lead to useful applications. And people have to understand that. And very often the governments everywhere, including in my country, have a tendency to dismiss basic science because it does not produce marketable ideas immediately, and they make a big mistake. If you just take as an example the development of vaccines now, the vaccines have been developed within 1 year, which is a tour de force, but this has been possible only because the last 20 years, a lot of research on messenger RNA, which was just basic science, were being done without the idea that it would apply to a pandemic that nobody had predicted. So again, this is another illustration of the fact that basic science is absolutely necessary, even if you consider that science has in the end to be useful. But it goes even beyond that, because there is a lot of science which will never be useful. It's clear that what people are doing to find out exoplanets or to find out whether there is life somewhere else in the universe doesn't have any direct usefulness. So we'll never go there. We'll never interact with other civilization, but still it is something that mankind has to know because it's part of our civilization. We have to build knowledge even if it's not useful. And but this is very hard to make people understand. I just give you some arguments that you can use when you discuss with people who tell you that, and think it's a big problem that we have to face, of course.
Thank you. Patricia.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Patricia Mie Suzuki. I'm from Pará State. I'm forest engineering student at Federal Rural University of Amazon. Well, sometimes scientific results can be very complicated to know sciences people understood. As a result of this, the engagement of those people can be very difficult. In your opinion, how may we bring science closer to people? And I'm curious if you have some activity in your local community in this way, explain about your studies and yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is to, as often as I can, is to give lectures or talks to students. It goes, I did that sometimes with elementary school students, most often with middle school and high school students. And I try to convey to them the excitement of science, the passion for science, the fact that asking big questions is very rewarding. Also, I try to tell them that it's demanding. Science is not a game. It's something which requires knowledge, which requires a lot of ability to, especially in the kind of in the case of physics, an ability to do mathematics, to compute, to solve equations. But I always try to show that behind the mathematical and the technicity of science, there are some big ideas which have to be put forward, and I give examples coming from history. So I try to do that, and I know that there are a lot of teachers who try to do that. There are a lot of programs which are called hand-on programs, in which you try to teach to young students, to young children, experimental skills, to show them that you can do simple chemistry or simple electricity experiments with very simple kits. And the kits, and you can also observe the stars and observe the planets with very basic telescopes, and all these kind of programs are very useful to tell children that science is fun and science is fascinating. And we need also to convey that to grown-ups, because after all, these are the people who basically fund science. If you want to have a society which will give money to scientists, I think the population people have to understand that science is useful and valuable. And so I try to explain that, and to say that I try to explain to people in countries, especially like Brazil, that the main wealth of a country is in the mind of the young people. And you give a perfect example of that. You have to nurture the spirit of young people for science and for knowledge, because this is certainly what is required for the future of a country, not only in Brazil, but everywhere. And even the countries which have natural resources, in the end, the power will come from the brain of the people, because the resources will last only the time they last, but you have to be prepared for the challenges that we are going to face. And for that, you need to bring more and more people towards scientific careers, engineering and science, and fundamental science and applied sciences.
I believe we have two follow-up questions there from Leandro, but also João Marcos. So João Marcos first, please, if I'm saying it right.
I'm João Marcos, currently doing my master in physics at Federal University of Tocantins. It's a great honor to be a part of this incredible event. So when it's coming to develop scientific research, the scientists must prove that science itself has its value, which demands lots of hard work and full time. Generally, financial investment for research funding is extremely precarious and the returns take too long. Some types of research can take decades to develop the first results. Even with so little science today is remarkably advanced and every day it's developed even more. That being said, what would you say to a person who is still at the beginning of his scientific career?
I think the question you are addressing should be the person who need an advice about that are the people who give money for science. And they should be asked to give more money for science, taking into account all what we discussed and said up to now. Now, about a young researcher, first of all, I think it's very useful, if possible, after a PhD to go for a postdoc abroad, to be able to try to learn new things, to change one's environment, to find new ways of thinking and new ways of doing research. And that's what I did, and that's what I recommend to my students to do that. But of course, after that, the question is, when they come back to their country, in this case to Brazil, what kind of position they will get and how they will be sustained and supported in doing their research. And I understand that it's a difficult time now. In fact, not only in Brazil, it's also a difficult time in France because the funding for research is not at the level it should be. What I can say is that some of you, and as it happened in France, some of you might stay abroad. And I know many very good scientists from South America, Brazil, Argentina, and other countries who have had their careers in the United States or in Europe because they did not find a way to be able to fulfill their ambition in South America. But I know I have also colleagues who came back to Brazil and who struggled and fought in order to be able to do things in this country, and it has been successful. There have been a period at the beginning of the years 2000, from 2000 to 2010, when the funding in Brazil was quite adequate and comparable to what it is in Europe. And I can only hope that this will happen again in the not too distant future in Brazil. I think what the politicians have to understand is that it's very easy to, it takes a long time to build up a good scientific environment, but it takes a very short time to destroy it, because if you only lose one generation of students, which is just 5 or 6 years, then you have broken the chain of science, and between generations, it's very hard to build it up again. So I really hope that the situation will improve in Brazil and that the funding for science will resume. And it's not only in Brazil. I have been involved also in this kind of discussion in other countries like Colombia and Argentina, and it's the same there. And I think it's very important because as you are the living proof that there is a lot of very bright young people in all these countries. And as I said, this is the future of these countries. You have very big issues, very big challenges at stake. And the challenges not only for Brazil, it's clear that the challenges that you are facing will have an impact on the development of the planet as a whole, because South America is a very big continent and you have resources there which are useful for the rest of mankind. So that's what I can say about that. I think this question should be addressed to politicians and to statesmen and women. They have to understand the issues of science. That's the basic point.
Thank you, Serge. We don't have very long left, and I would really like people to get the chance to speak. So if questions can be short, and Serge, if your answers could be very short, that's also great. Leandro, I was going to come to you next, sorry.
All right. So I am Leandro Nolé Eduardo, PhD student of Marine Science in the University Federal Rural de Pernambuco. And my question is something similar. I believe that to build a strong scientific community in Brazil, we need not only produce good scientists, but also keep them in the country. However, as a scientist, I feel that I may have better opportunities abroad. So my question is, thinking about the country and the science, do you believe that it's better if we stay in the country and fight for the science of our nation, even if it means working in not perfect conditions, or it doesn't matter? If I go in the best way we can, eventually I will end up contributing to science and to my country.
I think it's a very I would repent by yes or no. It's a very personal question. I face the same question from students in France. They are very bright students who decide to go abroad because they have much better working conditions abroad, and I cannot blame them. I think if you are ambitious and if your passion is science, you cannot be blamed for choosing the place where you will be able to provide the best solutions and get the best of science that you can do. There, in this, I can take a few examples of there have been Nobel Prizes from Mexico, Argentina, and of people who went abroad and did fantastic research and even got a Nobel Prize. This year, there was a French woman who got a Nobel Prize in medicine, and she's working in Germany because she found in Germany better conditions than in France. And I cannot blame her for that. I think science is universal. Science has no boundaries. And so if you find a good position elsewhere and are happy about that, it's good. Now, of course, if you think that you can bring to Brazil your knowledge and your skills, and that's important for you, of course, it's fantastic too. And as I said, I have examples of very close friends and good scientists who went to United States at the time of the generals in Brazil during the dictatorship. And when the democracy came back to Brazil, they came back and they were able to build science centers in various places in Brazil. And I'm sure that they got from this a lot of satisfaction, a lot of pleasure because it was useful for their community and for the country.
Thank you, Serge. Rodrigo, you had a follow-up.
Good afternoon. I'm Rodrigo Libera from University of Paraíba, and I study agroecology. I think you were discussing about denialism and access to people to science. I think science often comes into people's lives packaged inside the market format. So medicine or a new seed in my field, agriculture, a new genetic modified seed. What we are seeing is that we're losing a lot of traditional knowledge in science with herbal plants and in genetics that took tens of thousands of years to develop crop seeds that we can eat today, and favoring patented options by big corporations. I think this creates a detachment from people from day-to-day lives in science and denialism ultimately. So how do we make sure that science is not only seen by people with this market phase, but can dialogue with day-to-day and traditional technology and knowledge that took millennia to build?
It's hard to answer by to give a very short answer to this question, but it's I think maybe I am not a specialist, of course, in agriculture and if genetically modified organism, but what I would say is that what people have been doing over thousands of years is to do genetically modified organism, but over a long period of time. When you domesticate animals or plants, you modify them progressively, and maybe one has to make people, the general public, understand that there is no contradiction between traditional ways of doing things and the fact that modern science can allow you to do things in a more rational way and faster without losing all the expertise and all the knowledge which has been brought by traditional sciences. I'm not working in this field, but I can take as an example this Chinese woman who got a Nobel Prize because she used a very old method for, she developed in a modern setting what the Chinese medicine had learned to get medicine for
malaria.
Disease, for malaria, for instance. And so there is a connection. I think modern science and traditional science should develop together. And that's the only way to avoid this idea that there are conspiracy theories that the genetically modified organisms are just a plot from the big companies to poison our agriculture. And you have to understand that modern science can be useful in medicine, in agriculture, but it doesn't have to just forget what tradition have, the kind of knowledge which come from a very long time, for a long history, as you said. I think it should go together.
Thank you very much indeed. Serge, now I'm aware that we're overrunning, but there are three people, I think three, who have not asked a question yet, and I'd really like, or maybe four, and I'd really like them to get to ask their questions. So let's keep the questions and answers really short, and thank you for the audience for staying with us. Okay, Daniel Suarez, you go first.
Hi everyone, my name is Daniel Oscar. I'm studying agriculture at the Federal University of Amazonas. And my question today is about sustainable development. So we all know that we need to preserve the forests, we need to preserve our biodiversity, we need to preserve our planet for the next generation. So what is the role, what is the importance of science for sustainable development? Thank you.
I'm sure you know much more than I do about this field. But of course, science first is important because science can collect data. I think science is important because it tells you where are the problems. For example, how much of the forest is being destroyed every year, how much of what is the effect of this on the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, what is to measure the impact on the climate and on the biodiversity. So first it's observation. And also after that, science has been used to try to find a solution to what has been observed, which is new technologies, new ways to raise crops, new techniques to gather energy without producing CO2 and so on. So it's again, it's the same combination of observation and experiments and technology, which everything going together. But at the first level, science has to produce facts which are not fake news, which is very different. And of course, you know all this.
Thank you. And next, thank you for the question. Next over to Rui Aquino.
Thank you for the opportunity. Professor, I would like to ask you, what drives you to research? What keeps you motivated through the good and the bad days to keep working to do high quality research?
Okay, that's what drove me is the passion for new knowledge. The fact that I understood that I was, by the kind of research I was doing, I was part of a general trend towards trying to get to increase the knowledge about nature, to increase the knowledge about the physical laws, and that this knowledge would one day be useful for something, even if I did not know what it would be useful for. But I derived a lot of pleasure and a lot of excitement from the fact that I could discover new things. In fact, for instance, I worked in the domain of interaction of atoms with photons, and I was able to build systems in which one atom was interacting with one photon and this led to the observation of quantum effects, which were known before, but had never been observed under these simple and very straightforward conditions. And this is exciting by itself. When you observe something that nobody has observed before, even if it does not give any direct application, it's very thrilling. And so the excitement comes from that, from the fact that you challenge yourself, and that sometimes the challenge is successful and you observe what you thought you would observe, or you observe something new. It's a little bit like the challenge that an alpinist has. He just climbed the mountain because the mountain is there, and we try to find new things because there are things behind the horizon and we want to understand things better. It's very difficult to define that more precisely.
Thank you, but that was a beautiful answer. Victor Hugo, please.
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Haroche. My name is Victor Hugo. I'm a law student at Federal University of Paraná, located in the capital of the state, Curitiba. And I'm also a human rights researcher and defensor. And I would like to follow the lead of one of my colleagues and go back to the humanities. To give some examples of the many difficulties that the sciences are facing in Brazil, like she has mentioned, we have reduced the workload of the disciplines of philosophy and sociology in schools, and they're probably going to become optional disciplines thanks to the high school reform that took place during the government of the former President Michel Temer in 2017. In addition, the humanities area was excluded from federal scholarships of scientific initiations in 2020 under the actual Bolsonaro government. Is there a similar scenario of devaluation of the humanities in the countries where you've taught? And do you see any practical way to transform it?
I think there is a trend like that, and even in the United States, I think the humanities are going through a very difficult time now, and I think it's wrong, as I told you, but I think it might also due to the fact that people are afraid that humanities are too much linked toward politics and political issues, and of course this displeases some people. And I think it's wrong because, as I said, you cannot develop a society if you don't develop the idea of free thinking and free creative thinking, and humanities are essential for that. You have to read literature, you have to read philosophers, you have to know the history of ideas and in the past and today if you want to have an open mind and be ready to work even in science. So I just think we have to lobby for that with the political people, and it's clear that the point is that you have to make sure that the students who go into these fields will find the positions, will find jobs after that. So you have to make sure that these fields are open for jobs in society. And I think there are a lot of jobs which are important. Social issues, psychological issues are very important. The way people will respond in the future to the big challenges we have to face, the fact that we have to change our way of living if we want to sustain life on the planet will require an understanding of how people will react to that, how people will adjust to these big changes. And for that, we need sociologists, we need psychologists, we need humanities in general.
Thank you very much indeed, Serge. And then final question to Pedro.
Thanks, Adam. Just a unique moment being here. I'm Pedro Henrique Peixoto, an undergraduate student in mathematics in the Federal University of Goiás. As you mentioned during this panel, we do know that science has proved its importance for building a society based on education. Coming from a developing country as you, Professor Serge, in your point of view, from where it comes the willingness of being a scientist, and how much of this comes from elementary education, taking into account that the most amazing questions come from these students? Thank you in advance.
Yes, it's a good question. In fact, in my case, I was attracted to science when I was a child because I loved maths. I like to compute things. I like to count, to classify objects. I remember I classified the metals from the lightest to the heaviest one. I classified the planets according to their size, their mass, escape velocity from their surface, and so on. So I was a kind of maniac of classification, and I understood that's what my genes, I guess. And I was also fascinated by astronomy, by the fact that you can, by observing the planets and the stars, you discover that they obey to mathematical laws. And this adequacy between mathematics and physics was something which fascinated me and which kept surprising me all the time. As you know, certainly quantum physics is based on mathematical theories, very simple one for a mathematician, but still you have a lot of math built up into quantum physics. And the fact that the world obeys to equations is something which is really fascinating. And one of the first one to recognize that was Galileo 4 centuries ago. And that's, I think you can instill that in the mind of children, because I think it's a fascinating, it's a very mysterious and fascinating idea. And but for that, you need good teachers who are good in math first, which is not very often the case. What I think is very bad that in elementary schools, the teachers very often have only kind of literary training, but know very few things about math. And if you want to teach math even to young children, you need to be able to see the field from above and not be just in very simple calculation. For that, you need teachers who can give you this feeling of amazement. And that brings me back to what I said in the previous session, that if you need really good teachers for young people, and for that you need to pay them well, and you need teachers to be recognized as very useful, essential for the development of a country and a society. So if it was the last question, I want to thank you all. I was really amazed by, first of all, by your level in English, which I found remarkable, and by the fact that you are so interested by such important issues. And this, usually I'm a rather pessimistic person about the future of the planet, but listening to you, I am more optimistic now, because the future is in your hands. So, and this is true in Brazil, and it's true elsewhere too. And I want to wish you good luck, whatever you do. I know it will not be easy, but we have to do it. And I trust that you will be able to achieve very important things in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Serge, for those lovely words. And let me just second that the opportunity to listen to these extraordinary people from all over Brazil, and also May-Britt's absolutely infectious optimism from earlier, is a combination to leave us all feeling very hopeful. So just let me second Serge's thanks to you all for taking the time to be here and for your wonderful questions and for your eloquence. I also need to thank you, Serge, for your lovely answers and for taking so many questions in such a short time. That's wonderful.
I hope we will meet next year in person in Brazil.
Exactly. So when we organize the real Nobel Prize Dialogue in Rio and Sao Paulo, I hope you'll all be there. Let's hope it's possible. Let's hope the situation somehow improves quickly. And I'd also like to just give some words of thanks to the audience who have been watching, and some dedicated audience members will still be with us. And to them, I congratulate you for and thank you for your presence. And also hope you've enjoyed it very much indeed.
And take care of yourself, all of you, because I know you are in a very dangerous situation.
Well said. Well said. Thank you all. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.